A veteran took in a pregnant dog. What she gave him wasn't just puppies. Elijah hadn't spoken much since the day the desert took his brothers. He kept to himself an old storage shed turned makeshift home, a cot, and memories that refused to fade. When the winter storm hit, he expected the usual blackout and silence. What he didn't expect was the scratching at the door. A German shepherd barely standing, soaked to the bone, her eyes pleading but cautious. She carried something more than just a storm in her body, something fractured and strangely familiar. He didn't need another burden, but as he laid a blanket down and she collapsed beside it with a whimper, something shifted. In her pain, in her quiet strength, he saw a reflection of his own. He didn't know her name, didn't need to. She had already chosen him. The rain had a particular sound that night, less like water falling, more like grief unraveling from the sky. It struck the rusting gutters of Red Hollow's abandoned industrial district with a relentless rhythm, carving rivulets along the broken asphalt, erasing footprints in history in equal measure. Against the wind-battered concrete of the old brick plant, the downpour drummed a funeral march no one stayed to hear. The place had been silent for years, and yet it felt alive with the quiet hum of things left behind. Stories, scars, names fading into rust and soot. Elijah Grant pulled the collar of his army jacket tighter around his neck and stepped through the twisted fence like he'd done a dozen times before. His boots sloshed in shallow puddles that stretched like veins across the flooded lot, and the camera slung across his chest bumped softly against his ribs with each step. He didn't notice. His attention was focused ahead, toward the skeletal frame of a once booming brick plant that now stood like the ribcage of a giant creature, picked clean, forgotten. He liked places like this. They didn't ask questions. They didn't flinch at his silence or recoil at the distant look in his eyes. They simply stood, as weathered and hollowed out as he felt most days. Elijah had been photographing the ruins of Red Hollow's industrial past for the last 6 months, part documentation, part therapy. Most of the buildings were scheduled for demolition within the year to make room for a new condo development promising community, culture, and curated luxury. He would never live in them. His disability checks and part-time job at a hardware store barely covered rent. But it wasn't the condos that bothered him, it was the erasure. Places like this had ghosts, and sometimes the only way to understand your own was to walk where other souls had frayed at the edges. He stepped inside the structure, ducking under a low, rusted beam. His flashlight cut through the damp air, catching motes of dust and the pale shine of rain trickling through a collapsed portion of the roof. Water tapped steadily into a rusted oil drum, a metallic echo that filled the vast, cavernous space like a slow heartbeat. He moved toward the main floor, where old machinery stood like fossilized beasts, draped in graffiti and shadows. The silence was comforting. So was the repetition. Find the shot, line it up, breathe, click. Each photo was a small reclamation, a way to prove he still knew how to see things clearly, that he hadn't lost all his instincts back in Syria. That night came back in pieces, sometimes dust in the air, a scream cut short by an explosion, the shaking hands of a boy no older than 14, the bleeding wound Elijah couldn't stop, no matter how tightly he pressed. He closed his eyes for a moment, fighting off the memory like a fever. Lightning flashed outside, throwing stark shadows across the ruined walls. The thunder followed hard and fast, a rolling growl that made the windows tremble. He flinched. Old habits. The body remembered, even when the war was long gone. He turned toward a side corridor he hadn't explored before, drawn by the way the shadows pooled along the threshold like spilled ink. His boots echoed on the damp concrete as he moved forward, scanning, framing, focusing until a sound stopped him cold. A whimper. Not wind, not pipes. A living sound. Elijah froze, every sense locked in place. Then it came again, soft, broken, like a breath that didn't know whether to cry or hold on. It threaded through the cavernous silence like a plea lost in the dark. His body shifted before his mind caught up, instinct propelling him forward. 10 years as a combat medic had trained his ears to recognize suffering in all its forms, human, animal, or otherwise. He turned off his flashlight to listen more clearly. The rain drummed overhead. Then another sound sharper this time, a whine choked by pain. He moved quickly now, flashlight back on, sweeping low across the debris, past a broken pallet, around a rusted conveyor. The whimper came again, more urgent, pulling him deeper into the belly of the factory. And then he saw her, in a corner barely lit by the dim glow of his beam. Nestled into a makeshift nest of damp blankets and cardboard was a German shepherd, her coat matted with rain and filth, her sides heaving with labored breath. Her body trembled from the effort of each contraction. Her hind legs were tense, and from her rear, Elijah could see the beginning of a pup partially emerged, but clearly stuck. She looked up at him, and in that moment, everything stopped. Her eyes, dark and wide and rimmed with desperation, locked onto his not with fear, not with hostility, but with something deeper, something ancient. Elijah had seen that look before, on battlefields, in field hospitals. It was the look of someone who knew they might not make it but begged you to try anyway. "Jesus," he breathed, kneeling instinctively. "You're in trouble, girl." She didn't growl, didn't move, just lay there, panting, her body taut with effort, her gaze never breaking from his. The part of Elijah that had once operated on pure reflex clicked into place. Pain faded, the storm disappeared. The world narrowed to this one being, this one crisis, and what he could do to help. He reached slowly into his backpack, pulled out the compact med kit he carried everywhere like a superstition, and spoke in the same calm, steady voice he used to soothe wounded soldiers bleeding out in the dust. "I've got you," he said gently. "We're gonna get through this." And the rain kept falling. But for the first time in a long time, Elijah didn't feel lost inside it. The sound came again, thin and raw, like the string of a violin stretched too tight, fraying beneath the bow. Elijah froze, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. He hadn't imagined it. Something was alive in this tomb of brick and broken metal, and it wasn't just rats or wind. He turned slowly toward the source, his boots sloshing in the rainwater pooling through the cracked cement. The old factory exhaled around him, rust groaning under time's weight, steel rafters humming with the storm's breath. The next whimper hit harder. It wasn't sharp, not panicked, but tired, desperate. A sound that came from the edge of giving up. He moved without thinking now, stepping over a fallen beam, his eyes scanning the dark ahead. Years of combat fieldwork rewired the way he listened. He didn't just hear distress, he felt it. In his spine, in the shallow catch of his breath. His body knew this rhythm. Silence, pain, urgency. The light finally found it. A collapsed break room door, hanging off its hinges, faint streaks of mud, and something darker smeared along the floor. And then just beyond the doorframe he saw her. A German shepherd, curled tightly in a corner like a creature trying to disappear. Her coat was soaked through, streaked with grime and streaks of blood. Her sides rose and fell in sharp, strained bursts. Every breath was a fight. The muscles in her hindquarters trembled, locked in labor that had dragged on too long. Her ears didn't even perk up at the light. Elijah's first instinct was caution. Years of dealing with wounded dogs in war zones taught him not to trust the stillness. Pain made animals unpredictable. Some bit, some bolted, some froze in ways that made death seem gentle by comparison. But she didn't move, not even to flinch. She just lay there, eyes barely open. The remnants of a once disciplined creature, something trained and noble reduced to pure animal exhaustion. Her breath hitched, and her belly contracted violently. A high-pitched yelp escaped her throat, half growl, half cry, and Elijah stepped forward, heart thudding in sync with the storm outside. That's when he saw it. A small form, limp and half-emerged beneath her tail. A pup, wedged at an angle that screamed danger. The sack was already broken, but there was no movement, no breath, no life. "Damn it," Elijah murmured, crouching low, flashlight set on the floor now. He scanned her eyes again, still aware, still watching, but so close to giving up. His own breath caught in his chest. He felt his hands hesitate. For the briefest second, the weight of memory threatened to pull him under back to a dust-choked alley in Syria, a child losing too much blood, his own voice shouting for extraction that never came. Back to the moment he'd buried his shaking hands in a soldier's gut and found nothing to hold on to. The German shepherd whimpered again. Softer now, quieter. It was the sound of someone asking for help and expecting no answer. And just like that, the hesitation broke. "Okay," Elijah whispered. dropping his pack and rolling up his sleeves. "Okay, girl, I hear you." He moved slowly, deliberately, hands open as he approached. The dog didn't growl. She didn't retreat. Her eyes fluttered as if she could no longer afford the energy for fear. Elijah knelt beside her and placed a hand gentle, steady on her damp side. She was burning with effort, her body shaking in shallow tremors. "You're not alone," he murmured, more to himself than her. "Not tonight, M." His fingers found the pup's flank, stuck at the hips. Elijah knew enough to recognize a breech birth, one of the worst. He grabbed a clean cloth from his med kit, wrapped it gently around the slippery fur, and began to guide the tiny body free with slow, practiced movements. There was blood, but not too much. Her muscles clenched again, and he moved with a contraction, his breath syncing with hers like they were part of the same desperate system. With one final pull, the pup slid out onto the blanket with a slick gasp. Still, limp, no breath. Elijah didn't hesitate. He wrapped the tiny body in his hand and immediately began clearing the airways, rubbing the chest in small, firm circles. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, kid, breathe." The mother dog tried to lift her head, failed. Her eyes tracked his movements, dim with exhaustion but still alive with the thinnest thread of hope. Elijah pressed gently on the tiny rib cage again, rubbed harder, cleared the fluid once more. Then, a sputter, a cough so small it barely existed. The pup's tiny chest rose, shuddered, and then rose again. Elijah exhaled shakily, the storm forgotten, the cold gone. He sat back on his heels, holding the breathing pup in one palm like it was made of glass. His other hand moved unconsciously to the mother's head, brushing wet fur back from her eyes. "You did good, girl," he whispered. "Real good." She licked his wrist, weakly just once. Enough. And that's when he saw it. A worn, cracked collar hidden beneath her soaked fur. One word still legible on the faded tag. Hope. He stared at it for a long second, the irony not lost on him. In a place where everything was supposed to end, where factories died and memories festered, she had survived. She had given life. Even as her own strength ebbed, she hadn't run. She had curled around what mattered and held on. Thunder rolled again outside. But inside that corner of the world, something quiet had begun. Something sacred. Elijah pulled off his coat and laid it over her trembling body. The pup nestled against her instinctively, rooting for warmth, life, milk. Elijah gently helped guide it toward her belly. Another contraction hit, and a second pup began to emerge. This time, she didn't cry out. Her eyes stayed on him, and Elijah nodded, as if answering a question she hadn't asked out loud. "I've got you," he whispered, "because sometimes the world doesn't end in fire or war. Sometimes it begins again with a whimper in the dark." The second pup came easier, still trembling from the effort. The mother dog barely shifted as Elijah caught the slippery bundle in his hands, the warmth shocking after the cold slickness of the first. This one gave a weak squeal as soon as the air hit its lungs, a sound that made Elijah's chest ease for the first time since he'd crouched beside her. "Hey there, little fighter," he murmured, wiping the pup down with slow, steady strokes. "You're not wasting any time, huh?" The mother's breathing was still shallow, her body shaking with the aftershocks of agony and exertion. Her eyes drifted open, unfocused but still locked on his face, blinking slow and soft, like she was trying to memorize him in what little time she thought she had left. Elijah had seen that look before in soldiers bleeding out under a desert sun, in comrades whose strength gave way before their will ever did. It was the look of someone deciding whether or not to let go. "No," he whispered, leaning in. "You don't get to give up. Not tonight." He laid the second pup gently at her side, guiding it toward her belly where the first one now clung, blind and desperate. Both had found her warmth. Both were alive. But she was slipping. Her breathing slowed, belly barely rising. Her nose was cold now, not from the rain from within. Her ears twitched, but didn't lift. Elijah's medic brain kicked in. He moved fast. He opened his worn satchel and pulled out a compact thermal blanket, the same kind he used in combat zones to keep men from freezing in shock. He wrapped it around her carefully, tucking it under her side without shifting the pups. Then came the IV. It wasn't standard to carry anymore, not for a freelance documentarian hiking abandoned industrial towns, but some habits die hard. Elijah always kept one emergency bag, one butterfly needle, and one sterile line buried under his trauma shears and wound closure strips, just in case. Tonight was the case. "Hang in there, girl," he muttered, swabbing the skin on her front leg, searching for the vein. It took a couple seconds. Her blood pressure was dangerously low, but he found it. The needle slid in clean. He taped it down with shaking fingers. The clear fluid began its slow, saving drip. She didn't fight it, didn't flinch, just let her paw rest in his hand as though she'd already decided he belonged there. And then came the third contraction. Harder, deeper. She whimpered the sound so faint it was almost imagined, and Elijah shifted, repositioning himself behind her. The third pup was breached, too. And this time, silent. "Damn it," Elijah breathed. His hands were already wet, trembling from adrenaline and the bite of wind, but he couldn't stop now. "You did your part," he said aloud, his voice soft, almost prayer-like. "Let me do mine." With steady fingers, he reached in, feeling the slick resistance of muscle and life and something colder, heavier. The pup was lodged at an angle again, shoulder twisted, neck bent too far back. Elijah took a breath, closed his eyes for just a second, and then moved. Pressure. Gentle turn. Thumb beneath the jaw. Finger behind the spine. A soft pop. A release. The puppy slid into his palms with the weight of a stone and none of its warmth. No movement. No sound. No. Elijah started rubbing its ribs immediately, clearing the airway, wiping mucus with his sleeve when the cloth became soaked. He tilted the head back slightly, massaged the chest, mouth hovered close in case he needed to use breath. Still nothing. The mother's paw twitched. It was the smallest thing, a whisper of motion, but it caught him. She was watching him, still watching, still hoping. Elijah's voice cracked as he bent lower. "Don't make me lose this one." He switched angles, pressing two fingers in fast, precise motions along the tiny rib cage. The pup's chest didn't move. Its lips had turned a pale blue, even under the blood and fluid. Seconds stretched, then a soft, gurgled cough. The pup jerked, like lightning had passed through its bones. And then the cry came shrill and imperfect, but real. Elijah let out a sound that was half a laugh, half a sob. He wrapped the pup close, holding it against the heat of his jacket for a moment, then laid it down next to the others. All three were breathing now, alive. He reached down to the mother, placing his palm gently along her ribs. "I kept my promise," he whispered. And then unexpectedly, quietly, she licked his wrist. It wasn't frantic, not grateful in the way house dogs wag or whimper or crawl into your arms. It was something older, simpler, recognition, trust. She didn't need to understand what he'd done. She just needed to know he had stayed, that he hadn't walked away, that he had heard her. Elijah stared at her for a long moment. The wind howled through broken windows, rattling old pipes and stirring the scent of rusted steel. But in this ruined corner of the world, something sacred had happened. He reached again for the faded collar, brushing aside wet fur until the tag swung free. "Hope." He said the name aloud this time, softly. "Hope." Her ears moved, barely, but it was enough. Elijah leaned back, wiping his face with the back of his hand. He was soaked through, exhausted, trembling, but something deep inside him had shifted. In the middle of a forgotten factory, surrounded by concrete ghosts and thunder outside, life had fought its way through. And for the first time in a long time, Elijah Walker, former combat medic, accidental witness to a miracle, believed maybe it was worth staying. Not just tonight, but for whatever came next. The rain hadn't stopped. If anything, it had deepened, no longer frantic, but heavy, deliberate, like a sorrow too long held back. Elijah hoisted the limp garage door closed behind him with a grunt, the rusted rollers screeching in protest. He cradled the mother dog in his arms, her damp body tucked inside his jacket, while 3 tiny lives squeaked from the crate slung over his shoulder. His boots left wet prints on the cracked tile as he entered the old janitor's closet, the only dry, intact space he'd found in the building. It wasn't much. A cracked mirror above a rust-stained sink, mops long gone to mildew, the smell of bleach still clinging to the walls like old ghosts. But it was warm, or at least not freezing, and most importantly, it was safe. He lowered Hope gently onto a makeshift bedding of his thermal blanket and old insulation he'd ripped from the wall. She whimpered as she touched down, her body curling instinctively around the crate. Her ribs showed more clearly now, each breath shallow, clipped. She was fading, though she refused to collapse. Elijah had seen that kind of will before. In the jungle, in field tents, lit by trembling headlamps. Fighters always knew when to hide their pain. The pups had begun to root for warmth again, their eyes still sealed, their bodies blind to everything except instinct. One was notably smaller than the others, the revived one, the fighter. He kept crawling back toward Elijah's coat pocket, where he'd been resuscitated not long before. Elijah smiled faintly and whispered, "You remember me, don't you, little guy?" Hope stirred. Another contraction hit. He was beside her before she even cried out. A fourth pup. This one came fast, but quiet. Limp at first, then a twitch, a flutter of breath. Elijah rubbed it down gently and set it next to her belly. Hope didn't even lift her head this time. Her breath had grown raspier, eyelids fluttering half-closed. She needed help, now. Elijah dug into his rucksack. Not much left. Protein bars, a crushed can of beef hash, 2 iodine tablets, and a packet of powdered electrolyte mix. He made a quick judgment call. He broke the bar in half, chewed a piece himself, then mashed the rest with some bottled water into a paste. He scooped it onto his fingers and reached out to her mouth. "Come on, girl," he urged softly. "Just a little." She turned her head weakly, then to his surprise licked his hand. Not out of affection. Hunger. He leaned closer, letting her take what she could. Each movement drained her. But Elijah could feel it, the tiniest spark returning to her eyes. Her tongue was warmer now. Her belly moved just a little fuller. Not enough, but something. Another contraction gripped her body. He held her paw through it. 2 more pups came in the next hour. One strong, one barely breathing until Elijah, yet again, stepped in. The revived pup second of the night gasped back to life in his palms, lungs rattling, then stilled in calm. He had stopped counting now. His jacket was drenched, his knees aching on cold tile. But somewhere along the line, it stopped feeling like rescue and started feeling like ritual. And then something happened. Hope lifted her head not all the way, just enough to find him. In her jaws, she gently picked up the smallest pup, the one he'd revived first, the one that kept crawling back to him, and she placed it in his lap, not near him, not beside him, on him. Elijah froze. He didn't speak, didn't move. The mother dog rested her muzzle back down, let out the faintest exhale, and closed her eyes. But not from death, from trust, from something even deeper than that. Elijah sat still for what felt like eternity, the tiny pup warming his leg, making faint squeaks of contentment. His hands hovered midair like he was afraid to break the moment. Something inside him cracked open a wall he hadn't realized was still up. The old guilt, the loss, the hands he couldn't save, the breath he failed to return in a jungle thousands of miles from this storm-wrecked town. He'd spent years drifting since then, photographing crumbling steel, rusted rails, condemned things, because that's what he felt like, a condemned man walking. But this dog, this mother, had given him something he didn't know how to name. Maybe it was forgiveness. Maybe it was a second chance. He looked down at the pup in his lap, its tiny chest rising and falling against his palm. "You're not supposed to be here," he whispered. But then he smiled. "Neither am I." The storm raged on outside, wind lashing against the walls of the dead factory. But in the janitor's closet, among broken tiles and tattered cloth, something sacred held its breath and refused to leave. Elijah leaned his back against the wall, curling his body around the crate and the mother dog. He pulled his pack closer, drew his jacket around them all, and let the sounds of the new life lull him into the first sleep he'd allowed himself in weeks. It wasn't peace, but it was the closest thing he'd felt to home. The storm had not let up. It had simply changed its rhythm, less rage now, more weight, like grief that had settled into the bones of the town and refused to leave. Red Hollow had always been quiet at night, but that night it felt forsaken. Not a single porch light cut through the fogged rain. Only the low hum of neon from a closed-down liquor store flickered like a broken heartbeat. The wind howled down the alleyways like it remembered better days. Elijah stepped into that wind, one arm clutching his camera bag now turned cradle for the 6 squeaking pups and the other holding Hope close to his chest. Her breath was labored. Each exhale came with a tremor, her ribs visible beneath damp fur. She didn't whimper anymore. Even her pain had grown too tired to cry. He had wrapped her in the inner lining of his jacket, the rest now flapping loosely against the rain. It barely covered his shoulder, but he didn't care. She had bled in his arms. Now, she was his to protect. The trek from the factory to his studio apartment, if one could call the upstairs of an old hardware store a home, was barely 12 blocks. On a dry day, with 2 hands and no burden, Elijah could have made it in under 10 minutes. But that night, the road stretched. The concrete glistened like oil. Every street lamp was half broken, casting distorted halos. He walked in the gutters to avoid the icy sidewalk. His boots slipped twice. The second time, he fell hard on one knee. Hope whimpered faintly. "I know, girl," he gritted out. "I'm not letting go." He kept walking. Somewhere between 9th and Ashford, a curtain fluttered in a window. A man at a laundromat paused from loading his car, staring as Elijah limped past with a bundle of life wrapped in wet canvas in breathless effort. But no one stepped forward. No one asked. The world, it seemed, had forgotten how to touch what looked like broken things. A sudden gust whipped around the corner. Rain sliced across Elijah's face like needles. He hunched down, shielding the pups, curling more around Hope. That was when she shuddered in his arms, the kind of full-body tremble that a medic never forgets. She sagged. "Elijah!" A part of his brain cried out, using his own name like a reprimand. He shifted quickly, resting her hind legs on the top of the camera bag to relieve pressure. But her eyes, they fluttered. She was going. Number. "Don't you quit now," he murmured, panic threading his voice for the first time that night. The memory hit hard. The field tent, the mortar blast, the private named Henley, too young, too scared, and then gone under his hands while Elijah had screamed at an indifferent sky. Not again. He set the bag down on a bus stop bench, carefully unwrapped Hope from the jacket. The rain soaked her fur again instantly. She let out a sound something between a growl and a sigh and tried to crawl forward. But her limbs collapsed. Elijah didn't hesitate. He picked her up fully, pressing her soaked frame to his chest, heart to heart, and secured the camera bag with a drawstring across his back. "I've got you," he whispered. "You're not dying here." He carried her, 1 block, then another. His breath came ragged. His old shoulder wound flared up, an old bullet fragment pressing against nerves like a cruel reminder of what he'd once survived. Still, he didn't stop. At the edge of Maple Street, under a streetlight that flickered like a dying star, a teenage boy with headphones watched him pass. The boy muttered something, maybe pity, maybe just surprise. Elijah didn't look up. Only when he reached the side alley of his building did he allow himself a pause. The pups had gone quiet, huddled together under a layer of towel inside the bag. Hope was still breathing, shallow but steady. He looked up at the narrow staircase leading to his apartment door. It had never seemed so long. "I know, girl," he whispered, adjusting his grip. "One last push." He climbed, step by step. Wood groaned underfoot. His knee buckled twice. But when he reached the top and the old green door with paint flaking around the hinges came into view, something inside him cracked, not from pain, but from relief, so sharp it almost hurt. He kicked the door open with his heel. Warmth greeted them like a forgotten friend. It wasn't much. A space heater hummed by the window. Blankets piled up on an old reading chair. A stained rug. An old film camera on a tripod, aimed at nothing. But it was shelter. He laid Hope down gently on the center rug, unwrapped the camera bag, and carefully transferred each pup beside her. She didn't move, but her ear flicked when one pup nuzzled her neck. "You made it," Elijah whispered. He didn't realize he was crying until the drops hit the wooden floorboards. The first light of morning didn't pour through the window. It crept, pale and hesitant, like it wasn't sure it was welcome in a place that had been dark for so long. Elijah sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, bare feet numb against the chill. The heater clicked beside him, exhaling its modest warmth into the room like an old friend doing its best. He hadn't slept. Not really. Just dozed in shifts between checking the pup's breathing and making sure Hope hadn't slipped away again. She lay curled on a folded comforter now, barely lifting her head, but her chest rose and fell with steadier rhythm. Her eyes followed him with something between guarded trust and bone-deep fatigue. The kind of look that said, "You saved me, but I don't understand why." He didn't, either. His apartment had never been meant for company. It was the kind of place that felt like a holding cell for someone who wasn't ready to live but wasn't quite ready to die either. His bed was a mattress on the floor. The kitchen consisted of a hot plate, a dented kettle, and a single cup with the logo of a unit that didn't exist anymore. The only decoration was a photo on the wall, a soldier kneeling in the dirt, arms around a dog with soot on its muzzle. He hadn't touched that frame in years. Until now. Now the floor was a battlefield of makeshift bedding layers of towels, old blankets, a few heating pads he dug out from a box labeled Winter Camping, 2017. A tarp covered the center of the rug, lined with disposable pads he'd picked up in a pharmacy years ago during a flu scare. He found himself grateful for the paranoia. On the tarp, nestled in a soft circle of warmth, 4 pups wriggled. Blind, pink-nosed, whimpering in sleep and hunger, they pressed into each other like coals in a dying fire, each small life stubborn and unknowing. He hadn't planned on naming them. It felt like a bad idea, like attaching strings to something you might lose. But when the runt, the smallest one with a freckle-shaped mark on her back, let out a squeak and rolled onto her side, exposing her belly as if asking for the world to go gently, he said softly, "Clover." And the name stuck. The strongest one, a bold, squirming male with a thick neck and a howl too big for his size, was next. "Flint," Elijah whispered. "Because you're fire, and you don't know it yet." "Aye." The third had fallen asleep with its tiny mouth still latched to the feeding syringe Elijah had used minutes before, gentle, focused, as if drinking was a sacred act. "Nova," he said to her, "you burned your way back." And the last, who had wandered blindly, of course, to Hope's outstretched paw, and nestled there like it belonged, he named River. "Because even in the dark," Elijah murmured, "you found your way home." He didn't know why the names mattered. Maybe because he needed to remember this wasn't just a rescue. It was something else, something rebuilding itself in the silence, a contract of sorts, between broken things that refused to stay broken. Hope stirred beside the pups. Her paw brushed Nova's side, then stilled. Elijah reached out slowly, letting her see his hand, then tucked a warm towel over her hind legs. "You did good, Mama," he whispered. "Rest." He moved to the kitchenette, pulled open his tiny fridge and scanned the contents. Black coffee concentrate, 2 eggs, questionable, and some peanut butter. That wouldn't do. He needed protein, calories, hydration. For her, not him. He rummaged through his gear packs, finally finding an unopened MRE, chicken with rice. He opened it, cut it into small bites, and hand-fed her. Hope took them slowly, without protest. Her tongue brushed his fingers. Not greedy, not fearful, just tired, but alive. Outside, the rain had become drizzle. The town below was stirring. He could hear the groan of a garbage truck, the clatter of a shop gate rolling up. But inside, time slowed. He set up a second heating pad near the window, rearranged the blinds to let in gentle morning light, covered exposed cords, taped a list of feeding times to the fridge. And then he sat, watched them breathe, watched Hope's ears twitch, watched Clover roll into Flint, who growled like a miniature bear before settling down again. It wasn't peace, but it was something close. A moment later, Elijah got up, opened the drawer that had held nothing but expired batteries and old mail, and pulled out the collar he'd carefully set aside the night before. It still smelled like oil and fear. The nameplate was scratched, dulled from time and struggle. But when he rubbed it gently with a cloth, one word shone through. "Hope." He walked back to her, crouched down, and held it out. "Is that your name?" he asked softly. "Or is it what someone gave you when they had nothing else left?" Hope blinked slowly. Elijah didn't put the collar back on her. He just laid it beside her paw. Let her choose. She didn't move, but her paw nudged the edge of it. Just a little. The shadows in Elijah's apartment didn't just belong to the corners or the flickering light from the old heater. Some came from much further away, etched into the back of his skull like old wounds that had never stopped whispering. He had fallen asleep on the floor again, half curled near the pups. It wasn't intentional, but lately that was the only place his mind would let him rest. The mattress in the corner felt too far, too soft, too exposed. The dream came without warning, like most of them did. Smoke, dust, screams folded into radio static, hands pressing down on torn flesh. His own breath ragged in the filtered mask as he leaned over a body he couldn't see clearly. He was yelling something, maybe a name, maybe a number, maybe, "Don't you dare." Then the sound shifted, morphing into something shrill. Not a siren. Not a scream. A whimper. High-pitched, real. He jerked awake, fists clenched, heart racing against the cage of his ribs. But he wasn't in Kandahar. He was in his apartment in Red Hollow. And the warm weight against his chest wasn't a body bleeding out. It was a dog. Hope had moved from her nest and was resting her head against his sternum. Her nose brushed his collarbone, not pressing, not demanding, just there, grounding him. Her eyes weren't wide with panic or confusion. She didn't bark or lick. She simply stayed, like she'd seen this before in another life and knew how to steady the quake. His breath caught in his throat, not from fear but from the flood of something else. Gratitude. Elijah raised a trembling hand and placed it lightly on her head. Her fur was warm beneath his palm, coarse and soft all at once. She blinked once, slowly, and remained still. He didn't speak. There was no need. In the silence, the apartment hummed back to life, the heater clicking, a clock ticking on the microwave, the faint stirrings of pups in the blanket nest nearby. The world had not ended. He was still here. And so was she. Later that morning, as the first gray light bled into the kitchen, Elijah sat at the table with a black notebook in front of him. The pages were blank, still smelled faintly of cardboard and the cheap dye from the discount store on 8th Street. He uncapped a pen and, without fully thinking, wrote, "Day 3. Puppy watch." He paused, then continued. "Clover weighed 320 grams this morning. She tries to crawl over her brothers like she owns the place. Nova's eyes are twitching, maybe opening soon. River doesn't like being apart from Hope for too long. Flint keeps rolling himself into corners and barking when he can't find his way back." He stopped, tapping the pen against the page. Then he wrote something else. "Hope let me touch her paw when I changed the heating pad. No tension, no flinch." There was something calming about it, recording these tiny, fragile milestones, like taking snapshots of a life in motion, one paw print at a time. It didn't erase the memories, the desert, the bodies, the things they made him do, but it softened the edges. It reminded him that something new was being built, that maybe, for once, he wasn't just watching life fade away. He was watching it begin. Hope shifted across the room. She was lying now near the window, where a patch of sunlight had dared to visit. Her ears twitched as the pups began stirring again, snuffling for warmth and milk. Elijah rose, picked up his notebook, and walked over. He crouched beside her, scribbled a few more notes. Time of feeding, temperature of the heating pad, a reminder to sterilize the syringe again. Then, almost as an afterthought, he wrote on a fresh page, "I used to write after missions. Not field reports, real writing. Descriptions, smells, names. I was afraid to forget. Maybe I'm not done being that guy." Hope looked up. Elijah smiled, tired but real. "You think journaling makes me soft?" he whispered. She licked her paw once, then looked away like it didn't matter. He chuckled. "I'll take that as support." He stayed beside her a while longer, watching the pups latch and suckle. Life reduced to simple rhythms: warmth, closeness, breath. That night, he left the notebook on the nightstand beside the mattress. Not the floor, not the gear bag, the mattress. And when sleep finally came, it was dreamless. Because when Hope stirred at 3 a.m., nudging his hand softly with her nose, she wasn't waking him from a nightmare. She was just reminding him, "You're here. You're not alone." The knock came mid-morning, soft but deliberate. Not the kind of knock from someone trying to sell something. the kind that knew its place, familiar, like muscle memory. Elijah opened the door slowly, half expecting another delivery guy, maybe someone from animal control. Instead, there stood a woman in a brown fleece jacket dusted with fur, holding a canvas bag slung over one shoulder and a clipboard wedged under her arm. "Ellie," he said, surprised. She tilted her head, squinting through the screen door. "You gonna let me in, or do I need to get bitten first?" He stepped aside without a word. She walked in like she had 100 times before, back when this apartment was a stopping point between deployments, a place to crash with pizza boxes and unspoken grief. Back before things fell apart. Her gaze swept the room, the mattress, the space heater, the nest of blankets and towels in the corner. And then her eyes landed on Hope. The mother dog lay curled protectively around her puppies, eyes half-lidded but alert. The pups squirmed lazily, full-bellied and warm, twitching in their sleep. Ellie dropped her bag with a quiet thud. "Elijah," her voice softened, like she wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. "Tell me, you didn't pull this dog out of a dumpster or a ditch." "Industrial Park," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "Storm night." She crouched beside Hope, her expression morphing from shock to something else, entirely reverence. Hope didn't growl or cower. She simply lifted her head, met Ellie's gaze, and held it. For a long second, no one moved. Then Ellie spoke, barely above a whisper. "That's not just any shepherd." "She let me help her," Elijah said. "She was in labor. Pup was stuck. I remembered enough." Ellie slowly reached out, palm up, and waited. Hope sniffed once. Then, surprisingly, she nudged her muzzle into Ellie's hand. "Okay," Ellie murmured, heart visibly catching in her throat. "Okay, and..." She moved with gentle precision, lifting Hope's paw, checking her gums, running fingers along her ribs. Her touch was deft, practiced, but also intimate, like someone reuniting with a forgotten friend. "The collar says Hope," Elijah added quietly. "Old tag, half rusted." Ellie nodded. "She's got the stance, the temperament. Look at how she watches. That's imprint work, military, or at the very least advanced police K-9. He frowned. "But she's discarded?" Ellie didn't answer immediately. She gently palpated Hope's abdomen, then looked at the pup's 4 now, healthy, though one had a faint rasp to his breath. "She was likely pulled from active duty the moment she got pregnant," Ellie finally said, voice clipped. "A lot of departments don't deal with breeding, especially if it's not scheduled. If she went rogue or slipped through, they might have written her off." Elijah's jaw tightened. "You're saying they dumped her?" "I'm saying," Ellie said carefully, "that somewhere out there, someone knew what she was and still walked away." Hope rested her head back down, eyes flicking between them. "She's not feral," Ellie added. "She's trained, but she's also tired. You can see it in her coat, her weight. And yet, look how she's handling these pups. No aggression, no trauma signs." "She let me help her birth them," Elijah said almost to himself. "She didn't know me, but she trusted me." Ellie looked at him then, really looked. "Maybe she recognized something in you." They stood in the silence for a while, just watching the rise and fall of 4 tiny chests. Elijah motioned toward the kitchen. "Coffee?" She followed, eyeing the cracked counter and stacks of washed syringes and formula bottles. "You've gone full dog, Dad." "I'm surviving." "You're more than that." Her eyes softened. "You're healing." He looked away. In the kitchen light, Ellie saw the wear in his face. Not just fatigue, but layers of something deeper, years spent patching others while bleeding silently himself. She sipped the bitter coffee and finally asked, "So what now?" "I don't know," Elijah said. "She's here, they're here, and I'm trying." Ellie placed a hand on his arm. "They're lucky, all of them." He swallowed hard. "It's strange. I haven't had something need me like this in years. Not since..." "You don't have to finish that sentence," she said gently. Hope whined from the other room, a soft, melodic sound, the kind that wasn't distress, just presence. Elijah set down his mug. "Come meet them properly." Together, they returned to the living room. Ellie lowered herself beside the pups again, checking their bellies, eyes, reflexes. "You named them yet?" "Clover, River, Nova, Flint. Good names, she smiled. Any idea what you'll do with them? Keep them alive, one day at a time. Hope looked up as if she approved. Ellie exhaled. Let me help. You already are. No, she said. I mean long-term. Shots. Checkups. Anything you need. He hesitated. You sure? Ellie placed her hand over Hope's chest, feeling the slow, steady thump beneath. She deserves better. So do you. The knock came with rhythm 3 quick raps. A pause, then 2 more. Not impatient, not official. Just friendly. Elijah froze mid-swipe of a damp cloth across the floor. Hope's ears perked up, tail twitching, but she didn't growl. The pups, all 4, were nestled near the space heater, paws twitching in dreams. Another knock. Hey man, it's Carlos. I brought that dog stuff I promised. Elijah hesitated. The reflex to pretend no one was home, to let the world knock and move on, flickered hard in his chest. But Hope stood now, calmly alert, watching him, almost like waiting for him to decide whether this door, like so many others, would stay closed. He exhaled and opened it. Carlos stood in a soaked hoodie, arms full of mismatched items. An old dog bed, a barely used bag of kibble, 2 worn chew toys, and what looked like a baby blanket printed with cartoon ducks. You said you were low on supplies, Carlos said with a grin. Figured I'd trade rent gossip for dog cuddles. Elijah stepped aside. Come in, but don't step on River. He likes to sleep underfoot. Carlos's eyebrows shot up as he stepped over the threshold. You named them? Of course I did. Carlos looked around the apartment, a room half transformed from bunker to nursery. The military cot was pushed to the corner, replaced by blankets and a heating lamp. Formula bottles sat in a row beside syringes. The scent of damp wool, dried blood, and puppy breath hung in the air like something sacred. And then he saw Hope. Whoa! She was sitting upright now, muscles lean under her fur, head slightly tilted. Her eyes didn't blink much, they just studied. That's a working dog, Carlos said instinctively. Like, real working, not the YouTube trick kind. She was, Elijah said. Might still be. Hope didn't move as Carlos crouched down slowly, placing the toys and blanket nearby without reaching for her. She sniffed the air, ears flicking, but didn't retreat. Hey, Mama, Carlos murmured. I'm the guy next door who plays jazz too loud. You'll hate it. To Elijah's surprise, Hope inched forward. Not a greeting, but not rejection either. She let her nose brush the cartoon duck blanket. She's evaluating you, Elijah said from behind. She does that with everyone. She's smarter than most people I know, Carlos replied. The moment hung there quiet, comfortable. Elijah noticed something strange. His shoulders hadn't tensed. His hands weren't clenched. Carlos reached toward one of the puppies, Clover, the boldest, who was wobbling her way toward his shoe. Oh man, this one's trouble, he chuckled. You sure you don't want to name her after me? Carlosina? No, Elijah said dryly. She doesn't deserve that. Carlos laughed, not offended in the least. Then he looked up, a little more serious. All this. You okay, man? I mean, really? Elijah hesitated. He wasn't used to being asked. He started, then stopped, trying. Carlos nodded. Good. Trying is holy work, my friend. And judging by the looks of this crew, you're doing more than just surviving. A silence followed, not awkward, but heavy with understanding. I haven't let anyone in here for years, Elijah admitted. Carlos blinked. Seriously? He nodded. Not even maintenance. I fixed what broke myself. Carlos looked around again, not at the mess, but at the care, the effort, the quiet transformation of a closed-off world into a space that breathed again. Well, he said, voice low, thank you for letting me in. It means something. Hope came forward then just a step and sat beside Elijah. Her gaze was calm, watchful. Carlos smiled, almost in awe. She trusts you. Elijah looked down. She had every reason not to. Yeah, Carlos said softly. But here she is. He sat cross-legged on the floor as the pups crawled toward him, one nipping at his shoe, another pawing at the fuzzy cuff of his jeans. You ever think maybe you all found each other for a reason? He asked. I try not to overthink it, Elijah replied. Maybe, Carlos said, stroking Nova's head gently. But even a medic knows some wounds don't close just because time passes. They need warmth, pressure, repetition. Oh. Elijah looked at the man playing with his pups, seated in a living room that used to echo with silence. He looked at Hope, whose breathing had slowed, whose eyes were half-lidded with something dangerously close to peace. Maybe, Elijah said finally. Some wounds need witnesses, Carlos grinned. I'll be your witness, bro. Just keep the coffee warm. He stood up, brushing fur off his jeans, and added, You know, if you ever need help, vet trips, puppy-proofing, someone to talk to, you've got my number. Thanks, Elijah said, and he meant it. As Carlos walked toward the door, Hope patted behind him and gave one brief wag of her tail, more like a nod than a gesture. Carlos turned and saluted her. Permission to visit again, Sergeant Hope? No bark, no growl, just a blink. He smiled and slipped out the door. Elijah stood in the doorway long after it shut, watching the quiet apartment, the smell of wet fur, the warmth of bodies, the beginning of something he couldn't yet name but could feel. Not healing, not yet, but something close. The hum of the old desktop computer filled the dim veterinary office like a patient exhale. Rain tapped at the window pane, not as a storm, but as a soft, rhythmic reminder that the world outside still moved. Ellie squinted at the screen, her fingers gliding across the keyboard with quiet intensity. Elijah stood behind her, arms crossed, jaw set. Hope lay near the door, her body curled protectively around her pups. But her gaze was locked on Elijah's back, as if sensing something in him unraveling. No microchip, Ellie said, voice flat. At least, not one that's scanning. Elijah didn't speak. Ellie continued, clicking through databases while the fluorescent light above them flickered slightly. I'm running her features age, breed, training type through the statewide shelter and K the 9th of December emission database. It'll take a second. Some of these records are old. He shifted, impatient. What does that mean, decommissioned? Ellie glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. It usually means retired, sometimes transferred. But in rougher departments, it can mean abandoned, silently let go. He felt it then, that old military heat crawling under his ribs, the one that surged when someone was left behind. A soft ding punctured the room. Ellie leaned in, eyes narrowing. There. She rotated the screen toward him. Meet K9 to 431. German Shepherd female. Handler, Sergeant Jenna Parks, Red County Precinct. Designated name, Hope. 3 commendations for search and rescue performance. 1 field trauma assist. And, her voice dropped, a termination order filed 14 months ago. Reason, non-compliance during gestation. Elijah stared at the words, unable to blink. She got pregnant, he said slowly. Ellie nodded. And they dumped her. Yes. He looked away. The room blurred slightly at the edges. He wasn't sure if it was from anger, grief, or the feeling that something ancient inside him had been yanked to the surface. Hope hadn't moved. But now her ears twitched. Her tail gave one slow thump against the vinyl floor. She saved lives, Elijah whispered. She worked, she bled, and they threw her out like... He couldn't finish the sentence. Ellie watched him carefully. Elijah, number, I need to see all of it. Ellie hesitated, then pulled up the intake report. Grainy images appeared. Hope in uniform, beside a tall woman with bright eyes. Another photo, time-stamped from a field recovery, Hope carrying a child's backpack in her mouth. Mud splattered across her face. She was leaner then, more alert. But the eyes? The same. She was one of the best, Ellie murmured. He nodded once, eyes unmoving. Then came the report's last section, the final entry. Subject began refusing obedience commands after 7 weeks pregnant. Officer Parks requested exemption for maternity leave for K9. Denied. Subject removed from roster and marked non-returnable. Order issued for disposal or transfer to open shelter network. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. They tried to erase her. Hope stood now, slowly, and padded to his side. Without hesitation, she sat beside his chair, her head brushing his leg. He reached down his hand, no longer trembling, and placed it on her neck. You were never broken, he said, voice barely audible. They just stopped seeing you. Ellie leaned back, swallowing hard. That precinct got restructured 6 months ago. Their K-9 unit is gone now. Budget cuts, public backlash. No one there even remembers which dog went where. But she remembers, he said. All of it. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper. Hope shifted her weight, pressing a little closer into him. Her ribs still showed signs of strain, her breathing still shallow from recovery, but she held her head high, proud, not defeated. I don't know how she survived this long, Ellie said. She wasn't alone, Elijah replied. She had something to fight for. Maybe not someone, but something. He looked at the pups in the corner of the room. Clover stretched out in sleep. River nuzzled Nova's ear. Flint twitched, lost in puppy dreams. Life still fragile, but burning bright. And now she has someone, Ellie said gently. Elijah didn't respond. He just nodded once, slow, like he was signing an invisible contract with the universe. She needs papers, he finally said. Registration, license, immunizations, whatever it takes. Ellie blinked. You want to keep her officially? I want her to never be lost again. Ellie's throat tightened. I'll help. He looked at her. And the pups. We'll need a way to get them homes. But not shelters, not cages, families. Oh, she smiled then. We'll figure it out. Hope shifted again, sitting tall. Her tail thumped softly. And when Elijah met her eyes, something passed between them, quiet and binding. Not gratitude. Not ownership. Recognition. The first time it happened, Elijah hadn't even made it to the couch. He was standing in the kitchen, just after midnight, staring at the sink while the water ran cold over his shaking hands. The hum of the refrigerator behind him blurred into the memory of a Blackhawk's rotor. His chest was tight. Air refused to fill his lungs properly. The smell of metal, real or imagined, clung to the edges of his thoughts, like oil. Then, before the spiral could drag him deeper, something brushed against his thigh. Hope. She didn't bark. She didn't whine. She simply stood there, her body pressed to his side like a silent anchor. He hadn't heard her move from her spot near the pups. And yet, she was there as if summoned by some invisible signal. Elijah dropped to his knees, not out of control, but out of surrender. His forehead touched the back of her neck. Her fur was warm, and his breathing slowed. She stayed until his palms stopped trembling. From that night on, something unspoken changed between them. It was subtle at first. She began pacing near the front door whenever someone in the hallway lingered too long, not barking, just listening. When delivery drivers knocked, she stood between the door and Elijah, as if asking for permission before he approached. Once, when Carlos knocked with a box of chew toys and canned food, Hope had sat directly in front of the threshold, not moving until she heard Elijah say, "He's okay." Another time, when a neighbor upstairs dropped what sounded like a metal toolbox, Elijah flinched hard enough to spill coffee across his notebook. Hope was there again immediately, instinctively pressing her muzzle into his palm like a whisper reminding him he wasn't alone. He never trained her to do that. She just knew. It wasn't obedience. It was presence. One evening, Elijah was refilling the water bowls when the low rumble of thunder rolled in. It wasn't the noise that startled him, but the memory it triggered that time in Fallujah when the sky didn't warn them before exploding. He stood frozen, fingers curled around the faucet handle, eyes fixed on a point far beyond the window. Hope rose from her place by the pups. She padded across the kitchen and placed her chin on his forearm. Just her chin, not forceful, not dramatic. Elijah looked down. The room came back into focus. He whispered, "Thanks, partner," and meant every syllable. By the end of the week, he wasn't saying it by accident anymore. "Partner," he called when checking her bandage. "Partner," he murmured when she lay at the foot of his bed, guarding the pups in sleep. The word had always been reserved for people in uniform, for the ones who flanked your six, who cleared corridors with you, who knew when to cover and when to stay silent. He'd buried his last partner on foreign soil. But now, here was this dog betrayed, bruised, and still standing beside him, sensing things no one else did, reading him like pages only she knew how to turn. One morning, while journaling puppy weights and feeding schedules, he looked up and said, "Hope, you're not just healing, you're helping me heal too. Her tail wagged once, soft, as if she understood. Later that evening, Elijah sat in the living room with the lights dimmed. The apartment no longer smelled like antiseptic and silence. It smelled of blankets warmed by fur, boiled chicken stock, and something else he hadn't felt in years' continuity. Hope sat near the window, alert as ever. She turned her head slightly before the hallway light even flickered under the door. A soft knock followed. Elijah smiled without tension this time. "Partner," he called. Hope glanced back at him once before returning to alert position. No growl, no alarm. It was Carlos again. She knew. When Elijah sat down beside her that night, pups curled up in the folds of an old military fleece, he placed one hand on Hope's back and said quietly, "You don't owe me anything, but I think I owe you a lot." Hope didn't respond with sound, but her body leaned into his, as if to say, "We're even." And maybe they were. Not in scars, not in service, but in soul. It began with a nudge, not from Hope, but from the smallest member of the new family, Clover, the firstborn, the one Elijah had nearly lost that stormy night, limp in his hands until he'd whispered, "Not today, little one." She was the smallest still, lighter than the rest. Her fur shimmered like wet wheat under the lamplight, and though her littermates tumbled over each other with the typical chaos of growing life, Clover or Scout, as Elijah had begun calling her in quiet moments, always seemed to be watching him. It wasn't just instinct. It wasn't just warmth. It was different. The first time Scout crawled across the floor to him, it was just after sunrise. Elijah had fallen asleep on the hardwood with his back against the couch. A wool blanket draped over him, half a journal page of scribbled feeding times curled in his lap. The apartment was quiet except for the soft squeaks of paws and the rhythm of deep, trustful breathing. A sudden warmth touched his leg. He blinked. Scout, barely larger than a canteen, had made the journey across the folded fleece and found his knee. She nudged her nose into the pocket seam of his pants and curled there. Hope lifted her head from the corner. She didn't move, didn't interrupt, just watched, eyes half-lidded as if to say, "I sent her." Elijah didn't move either. He didn't want to break the spell. The second time, it wasn't morning. It was the middle of a nightmare. He'd been deep under again, heat, sand, screaming comms, metal that whined before it tore. He woke to the sensation of weight, small weight, pressed against his chest. Scout. Somehow she had wriggled from the nest again and scaled the heap of his hoodie that lay on the floor beside the mattress. She nestled against his collarbone, heartbeat fluttering like a tiny drum against his ribs. Hope was watching again. This time, Elijah whispered, "You sent her, didn't you?" And then, softer to Scout, "You're braver than you look." By the end of that week, it became a ritual. Every time Elijah sat to journal, Scout made her way to him, now more sure-footed, her tiny legs wobbling less. Sometimes she stumbled. Once she face-planted into a shoe. But always, she found him. At first, he tried placing her back gently with the others, worried that her constant movement might tire her out. But the next hour, she would return. He gave in. He started calling her Scout with intention now, not just a nickname, but a title, one she earned. Hope didn't mind. In fact, one rainy afternoon, she picked Scout up gently by the scruff and brought her over, laid her directly into Elijah's lap while he sat cross-legged on the floor beside the heater. No bark, no command, just action and trust. The room was dim that evening, the kind of light that slipped sideways through half-closed blinds, catching dust like falling stars. Elijah had just returned from throwing away the trash. He left the door cracked open out of habit, trusting the pups were corralled. When he came back inside, Scout was sitting in front of his chair. He knelt slowly, arms wide. Without hesitation, she toddled forward and pawed at his chest, then did something she hadn't before. She let out a single yip, sharp, small, but deliberate. He looked to Hope. She was sitting upright by the window, regal in her posture, her eyes filled with something ancient and knowing. This time, Elijah didn't question it. He knelt down beside Scout, lifted her carefully, and placed her against his shoulder. Her tiny claws tapped his collarbone. He felt her sigh. "You've got orders, huh?" he whispered. She gave another soft sound. Not a bark, not a whimper. An answer. Elijah had seen battle. He had seen what silence means after an explosion, what it means to hold someone's hand while the light leaves their eyes. He had watched buildings collapse and morals blur. He had seen trust broken by men in uniform who forgot their oaths. But in that moment, in a dim room smelling of milk and rain, with a puppy on his chest and a mother dog watching like a sentinel, he felt something clear. This wasn't random. This wasn't just birth. This was a pact, not between man and animal, but between wounds, between survivors. That night, as he sat with Scout sleeping across his stomach and Hope lying just inches away, her eyes finally closed, Elijah wrote something different in his journal. Not weights, not feeding times, not vitals. He wrote a name, mission, Scout, and underneath it, you were the first breath after the silence, the first light after the tunnel, maybe the first reason I've had in years to stay. It was the kind of knock that didn't belong on their door. 3 raps, sharp, even, no hesitation. Elijah had been journaling at the kitchen table, Scout nestled on a folded towel beside his notebook. Hope's head snapped up before the final knock even landed. She rose, slow and controlled, no bark, no growl, only stillness, like a shadow that had just remembered its duty. Elijah stiffened. The pen slipped from his fingers. He knew that sound. It wasn't a neighbor asking for sugar, wasn't Carlos with groceries. It was the sound of gloves, of formality, of something wearing a badge without warmth behind it. A cold film of sweat broke across his palms. He stood slowly, knees cracking from the hours crouched on the floor earlier with the pups. His heart wasn't racing, not yet. It was sinking, like weight thrown into water. Heavy, irretrievable. Hope moved to the door, her body angled, not aggressive, but alert, protective. Elijah exhaled, reached out, and opened it. The woman on the other side wore a gray utility jacket. Her hair was pulled tight under a cap with a municipal seal. A clipboard was tucked against her chest, and the glint of a badge caught the hallway's pale light. "Mr. Elijah Callahan?" she asked, her tone clipped, bureaucratic, unbothered. He nodded once, didn't open the door any further. "I'm Officer Dunham with Animal Control. We received a report of multiple unlicensed canines being housed in this unit." She said it like it was a traffic violation, like it wasn't 4 fragile lives wrapped in blankets on his living room floor, like it wasn't Hope who had saved him from a screaming war in his head. Elijah's throat closed. His fingers curled into his sleeves. "I don't understand," he said, voice low. "Who reported this?" "I'm not at liberty to disclose that," she replied, professional and distant. "But if you're housing animals that are unregistered, it's my duty to confirm their welfare and licensing." Hope stepped into view then, calmly placing herself between Elijah and the open doorway. Her eyes locked onto Dunham's, not defiant, but unwavering. Dunham blinked, took a half step back, instinctively. "She's trained," Elijah said quietly. "She won't bite unless I say so." There was a long pause, a shift in the air. "I need to see them," Dunham stated again, less firmly now. Elijah didn't answer right away. His body had gone rigid, vision tight. The walls of the hallway seemed to squeeze inward, the buzz of the fluorescent light above growing louder, harsher. He wasn't in the apartment anymore. He was back in Fallujah. The knock had been on a steel gate. The badge had said peacekeeping force. They'd come for a routine search just like this. Dogs barking, children crying, mothers pleading while armed men stepped over prayer mats with mud on their boots. Routine never felt routine when the person behind it had the power to take something. "Elijah," a voice cut through. Not Dunham's, his own, from somewhere deeper, from the part of him that still remembered how to breathe. Hope looked up at him, not barking, just watching, grounding him. He swallowed hard, then stepped aside. Dunham entered carefully, her boots clicking on the hardwood. The apartment wasn't large, but Elijah had made it into a haven. Heating pads glowed softly beneath blankets. Water bowls were freshly cleaned. Formula bottles were lined on the counter like precision instruments. The pups, Clover, Nova, Flint, and River, stirred at the sudden cold draft but didn't cry. Hope followed Dunham's every step with eyes like amber lanterns. Dunham crouched, looked at the pups, took out a penlight. "They're younger than I thought," she murmured. No signs of malnutrition. Bedding's clean. Air's warm. She stood and scanned the room. No smell of waste, she added almost begrudgingly. You've been bottle feeding? Elijah nodded once. Are you licensed to foster? No, he said. But I didn't plan this. I found the mother in labor behind the Wexler plant. She would have died if I left her. He didn't tell her about the storm, the mud, the first stillborn puppy he'd brought back with trembling fingers. That wasn't part of her form. Dunham's eyes fell on Hope. She's the dam? She asked. Yes. She doesn't have a chip. I know. You understand that by law, she's considered stray until proven otherwise. Elijah's jaw tensed. She's not stray, he said, voice quiet but firm. She's Hope, and she's home. For a moment, Dunham didn't speak. She glanced down again at the pups, then back at Elijah, then finally at Hope. The German shepherd remained still. Her tail didn't wag, her head didn't tilt. She just watched, as if she knew exactly what was at stake. Look, Dunham said, her voice softening just slightly. I've seen neglect cases. Filth. Blood. Puppies in shoeboxes. You're not that. She clicked. Her pen closed. But if someone made a complaint, this place is flagged. I have to file a visit. Elijah's breath caught. What does that mean? It means someone will follow up. Maybe not me. Maybe someone less understanding. A silence stretched thin between them. Then Dunham added, You've got 48 hours. Get paperwork started, vet certification, temporary foster permit, even a neighbor's affidavit would help. He didn't thank her. She didn't expect him to. At the door, she paused, then looked at Hope one last time. She's a damn good dog, she muttered. Not many stay that calm when I knock. Elijah simply nodded, then closed the door behind her, slow, measured. He didn't speak for a long while. Hope moved beside him, her body brushing his leg. He knelt, and for the first time since she arrived, he wrapped both arms fully around her neck, not in panic, not in instinct, but in promise. You stay with me, he whispered, forehead against her fur. I'll fight for you now. Hope exhaled, low, steady, and Scout, from her blanket, let out a tiny yawn that broke the stillness like a candle being lit in the dark. Dunham stood in the hallway just outside Elijah's apartment door, her hand hovering over the clipboard as if it weighed more than her job. A breeze from the stairwell caught the edge of her municipal jacket, fluttering it just enough to reveal the embossed badge beneath sterile, official, unfeeling. Inside, Elijah knelt beside the pups, his body shielding them out of instinct, not logic. Hope was seated near the front door, still watching it long after Dunham had stepped out as if waiting for it to come back with teeth. But when the knock didn't return, she padded slowly toward him and sat down with a soft thump of her hindquarters. She didn't lean in. She didn't nudge. She just stayed close. Dunham's voice broke the silence, not harsh, but not casual either. Elijah, she said, still not turning around. Do you know the name Gregory Walsh? The name was like a flint against stone, a spark in Elijah's gut he couldn't quite place. I've heard it, he said slowly, standing. City council, real estate money, likes ribbon cuttings and cameras. Dunham finally turned. Her gaze met his no longer cold, but not warm, measured. He's the one who sent the complaint. Elijah frowned. But it came from a neighbor. Dunham shook her head. That's what the report says. But internally, I was told to make sure this inspection happened, and to document everything. She held up the clipboard, her grip slightly tighter now. They didn't care about the puppies, or even the dog. They cared about you, about this address, this building. Elijah's brow furrowed. What does that mean? She took a step closer, lowering her voice. Walsh wants to shut down the Eastview shelter, she said. Says it's underperforming, a liability. What he means is, it sits on land that would make a perfect luxury condo site right on the edge of Red Hollow's historic zone. All he needs is a few incidents to prove it's unsafe, that animals are being mishandled, that there's chaos where there should be control. Elijah stared at her, the weight of her words settling like bricks. And Hope? He asked. Where does she fit into that? Dunham exhaled. She was registered at Eastview, part of a K-9 division foster agreement with the precinct experimental program, years back. No chip, because they were tracking behavior with analog logs. When she got pregnant, someone dropped her at Eastview under a decommission clause. No paperwork, no formal discharge. She paused. She was just left. Elijah clenched his jaw. Hope, behind him, lay down quietly, her ears half folded, not from fear, from fatigue, from understanding. They were supposed to find a replacement, Dunham continued. But the shelter's understaffed, underfunded, and... She slipped through. And now, Elijah said bitterly, Walsh uses her as proof the shelter loses dogs. Dunham nodded. He wants to privatize animal control, roll it into a citywide contractor. That includes disbanding the shelter and reallocating its animals, or putting them down if they're unclaimed or unlicensed. Her eyes met his again. And dogs like Hope? Dogs with history but no proof? They're easy targets. A silence filled the room like rising water. Elijah looked down at the pup still wriggling under layers of warmth, completely unaware of the storm circling outside their small, borrowed peace. How long do I have? He asked. Dunham didn't answer right away. Then, technically, you've got 48 hours to file paperwork for temporary custody. But unofficially, the moment Walsh sees this didn't go sideways, he'll push harder. He wants noise, media, a spectacle. And if I stay quiet, Elijah said. Dunham's voice was quiet now, heavy. Then he'll find someone else. Another case. Another Hope. Until no one's left to fight back. Hope shifted slightly, resting her head on Elijah's boot. He looked down at her. She's not a mistake, he said softly. Dunham's eyes softened. Just a little. No, she said. She's a threat. To them. Because she proves that the system failed. And that someone outside of it picked up the pieces. She walked back to the door, stopped, and looked back one last time. Get a vet to sign off on those pups. Apply for emergency fostering status. And for God's sake, tell someone who cares. Not just me. Elijah crossed his arms. I haven't told anyone in years. Dunham smiled, a brief, tired curve of her mouth. Maybe it's time to start. Then she left. Later that night, Elijah sat at the table again, Scout nestled on his lap, the other pups bundled in a warming nest made of his old army coats and towels stitched with the insignia of things he never talked about. Hope rested near the heater, chest rising and falling with quiet rhythm. The file folder Dunham had handed him earlier, the one labeled K9 Withdrawal, case number 4429H lay open. There was no photo, just a date, just the words, transferred to public shelter without placement. No return scheduled. Elijah ran his fingers over the last line, then picked up his pen. He wrote 3 words in the margin. She was mine. Hope's ear twitched, as if she heard the scratch of ink, as if she understood. And Scout, the smallest of the 4, nudged her tiny head under his thumb, a gesture so small, so impossibly soft, it made Elijah close his eyes for a long, aching moment. The apartment had gone quiet in the way only deep night can bring. No car horns, no footsteps above, just the occasional hum of the radiator and the soft rhythm of breathing, both human and not. Elijah sat in the corner of the room, knees pulled up, his back against the patched wall where the paint had peeled long ago. A mug of untouched coffee cooled beside him on the floor, forgotten. The light above the stove flickered, casting the room in soft amber and long shadows, as if time itself had slowed to listen. Across from him, a nest made from his old duffel coats and faded marine blankets pulsed with small, steady motion. The pups Clover, River, Nova, and Flint were bundled together, a warm, twitching pile of new life. One of them let out a tiny squeak in sleep, and another kicked a hind leg, and wrapped around them, like a question mark drawn in flesh and fur, was Hope. Her tail curled toward her paws. Her nose rested just above River's ear. One eye, the good one, opened halfway and found Elijah in the dark. She didn't move, didn't blink, just looked at him. And in that look, Elijah saw what he'd been trying not to face all day. That she knew. She had always known. Earlier that morning, after Dunham left, Elijah had sat with the intake report open in his lap. It felt like reading a betrayal, disguised as a spreadsheet, clinical, calculated, full of codes and checkboxes. Disposition, high-strung. Potentially reactive. Unfit for civilian adoption during gestation. Recommend non-public transfer or controlled surrender. The lines felt like cuts on the page. He imagined some bureaucrat, faceless and tired, checking those boxes without ever seeing her eyes, without knowing the way she placed Scout on his lap that night, without hearing the low rumble she made when thunder cracked, not from fear, but from instinct, as if warning the world not to touch what was hers, what was theirs. But logic had clawed at him since Dunham's warning. 100 what-ifs, 100 doors he didn't want to open. If he kept hope, if he filed the wrong paperwork, if the city retaliated, they could take her, and the pups. Or worse, they could declare her unstable, dangerous, label her like they once labeled him, unfit. So for hours, the thought chased him like a low growl in the background. Would it be better for her if I let her go? Now, in the hush of midnight, he watched them sleep. He tried to imagine the apartment without her. The corners would feel empty. The air would be thinner. There would be no one to wake him gently when his past reached up from the dark. No one to sense the panic before it started. No quiet weight leaning against him when the silence grew too sharp. And the pups, they wouldn't understand, but they would feel it. The absence, the shift. Something deep stirred in his chest. Something older than pride and louder than fear. He stood slowly, careful not to make a sound, and crossed the room. Kneeling down beside the pile of fur and warmth, he let his fingers hover just above Hope's head before he rested them softly between her ears. She didn't stir. She simply let him touch her, trusting that he would. His voice came in a whisper. Fragile. Honest. I thought about it, he said. I thought about letting you go. For your safety. For theirs. For mine. He exhaled, and it felt like pouring something heavy from his lungs. I even tried to convince myself it'd be easier. Hope shifted ever so slightly, her tail thudding once against the floor. But then I looked at you, Elijah said, his voice cracking like old floorboards, and I remembered something I said in that storage room before they were even born. He glanced at the pup's tiny sides rising and falling, dreams flickering behind sealed eyelids. I told you I'd stay, he whispered. That I wouldn't walk away. Hope opened both eyes now, fully awake, but still. And I meant it. He didn't try to say more. There was no speech, no defiance, just truth quiet and grounded like soil after rain. He pressed his forehead gently against hers, the scar above his temple brushing the ridge of her brow. You're not just a dog, he murmured. You're the only part of me that didn't break. For a long moment, the world was just the space between them. Then, Hope lifted her head just enough to touch his chin with her nose. A soft, brief thank you. When Elijah stood, his knees popped. Age, injury, fatigue, he felt all of it. But something deeper rose with him too. Resolve. He walked to the counter and pulled the city-issued folder from its resting place. Papers fluttered loose as he opened it. Authorization forms, foster waivers, probationary transfer clauses. He grabbed a pen. His hand hovered above the first blank space for a moment, then moved with purpose. Elijah D. Hart, applicant for emergency custody, Hope and 4 neonatal pups. He signed. Dated. Stamped it with his fingerprint. And when it was done, he placed the folder next to the stove light, where it would be the first thing he saw in the morning. Behind him, Hope let out a breath that sounded almost like a sigh. And in the corner, one of the pups, Scout, as always, began to crawl toward the edge of the blanket, tiny paws pressing into the fabric, as if already searching for the one who chose to stay. The kitchen was filled with the scent of boiled rice and shredded chicken, simmering gently in the dented saucepan that Elijah hadn't used in over a year. He stirred absent-mindedly, not because the food needed attention, but because the motion gave his hands something to do. Behind him, Clover Scout really was wobbling her way across the folded towel near the heater, her little legs gaining confidence by the hour. Hope lay nearby, one ear perked, watching over them all like a tired but undefeated sentinel. Carlos leaned against the doorframe, chewing on a plastic stir straw like he was thinking through something too big for words. Elijah, he said finally, I talked to my sister. Elijah didn't respond right away. He let the silence fill the room like steam rising from the pot. Carlos stepped in closer, lowering his voice, respectful of the intimacy surrounding the nest of fur and breath and healing. She works for Channel 14. Local news. Human interest stuff. She owes me a favor from back when I bailed her car out of a sinkhole. Elijah raised an eyebrow. That sounds dramatic. It was. She screamed at the tow guy until he cried. Carlos grinned, then softened. But she's good. And I told her about hope, about the storm, the pups, everything you've done. The wooden spoon paused mid-stir. Elijah turned his head slightly, expression unreadable. Carlos held up both hands, disarming. Not everything. Everything. Not the overseas stuff. Just the now stuff. Elijah went back to stirring, but the rhythm was slower, more deliberate. She wants to do a segment, Carlos said. Title like, Veteran Saves K-9 Mother in Storm. Could go viral. Raise awareness. Maybe even donations. Hope let out a soft huff from the blanket, as if responding to her own headline. Carlos stepped over and crouched beside her, scratching gently behind her ear. You'd be famous, chica. She doesn't want to be famous, Elijah said. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of a man who'd been burned before. Neither do I. I get that, Carlos replied. But this isn't about spotlight. It's about defense. You said Walsh is circling, right? Trying to frame this place like it's some rogue operation? Elijah didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. Carlos straightened. Then let's shine a light first. Get ahead of him. Tell the story before he twists it. Maria said you'd control the terms. No ambush questions, no exploitation. Still, Elijah hesitated. His hands clenched the edges of the countertop. What if they dig deeper? He asked. What if Syria comes up? Carlos was silent for a moment. When he spoke, it was with care. Then we set boundaries. You talk dogs, not deployments. Hope, not helicopters. We make it about them. Elijah looked across the room. Scout was now trying to climb onto Hope's paw, tumbling backward every time. Her persistence made his chest ache something soft and unfamiliar, like joy with a scar. He exhaled. You trust your sister? With my own life, Carlos said. And now, with theirs. Elijah nodded once. A decision sealing inside him like setting concrete. All right, he said. But we do it my way. No on-camera questions about the Corps. No footage of the apartment without consent. And it ends if the dogs get stressed. Carlos smiled, but it wasn't smug. It was proud. Dio. Maria arrived the next afternoon. She wore a navy blue jacket and jeans. No flashy logos or camera crew, just her and a single DSLR on a tripod, held like a promise. Her hair was tied back, and her voice was warm but precise, like someone who'd walked into 1,000 delicate rooms and learned how to be welcome in each one. Hope didn't growl. That was Elijah's first sign. Maria knelt low, allowing Hope to sniff her knuckles, waiting patiently until the dog's tail gave a slow, thoughtful wag. Thank you, Maria whispered. Not to Elijah, but to Hope. Elijah watched closely, standing behind the pups like a wall. His posture still bore the stiffness of vigilance, but his shoulders weren't as tight as they used to be. Maria unpacked her gear with quiet grace, asking before moving anything, setting up in the sliver of sunlight that crept through the blinds. She didn't ask about the combat medals on the wall, didn't glance too long at the locked trunk in the corner. Just focused on the den they'd created: blankets, space heaters, repurposed Tupperware filled with puppy food. I've seen shelters, she murmured. None like this. Elijah knelt beside Hope, who sat calmly with Scout resting her chin on his boot. They're not just rescues, he said. They're survivors. Maria looked up at him, eyes kind and steady. So are you. The interview wasn't really an interview. It was a series of observations, Elijah narrating how Hope had brought the pups into the world in a supply closet, how he fed her protein bars and kept her warm with his own jacket, how Scout, the firstborn, had crawled to him on her own. Every word he gave was measured, not out of distrust, but out of reverence. This wasn't a press piece to him. It was a testament. Maria asked softly. Why did you choose to keep them, knowing it might bring heat on you? He looked down at the pups. Because they didn't ask to be born in a storm, he said. And she didn't ask to be abandoned for doing what nature intended. Hope looked up at him then, her ears lifting almost as if she recognized her name without it being spoken. They were never broken. Elijah added. They just needed someone to stay. Maria blinked, but didn't cry. She simply reached over and turned the camera off. That's your closing line, she said. That night, Elijah stood by the window as lights from the city pulsed faintly below. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring: attention, backlash, maybe even escalation. But when he turned, he saw hope stretched across the floor. Scout curled against her chest like a second heartbeat. And in the low light, it didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like home. And for the first time in years, he didn't dread being seen. He just hoped they would see the right things. The living room had never been so quiet. Even with the soft hum of Maria's DSLR recording on the tripod and the low crackle of the space heater in the corner, there was a stillness that clung to the air like the hush before a confession. Outside, snow was beginning to fall again, featherlight against the window glass. But Elijah didn't look toward it. His eyes were on the floor, steady but distant, as if he were watching something long buried rise to the surface. Hope sat beside him, her shoulder just brushing his. She hadn't moved since Maria began rolling, as if some wordless understanding had passed between them. This was Elijah's moment, and she was his anchor. Maria had started the session gently, easing into the space like a respectful guest. She asked about the puppies first, their names, their quirks, how Scout liked to crawl into Elijah's work boots, how Nova had figured out the food tray faster than the others. Elijah's voice, though guarded, softened when he spoke of them. But now, she leaned forward slightly, voice low. Can you tell me about that night? The storm? There was a pause. Elijah's hand flexed once on his knee. Then, slowly, he nodded. He didn't raise his voice, didn't dramatize the telling, but every word landed like it had traveled through gravel and bone before it could be spoken. I was on my way back from the pharmacy, he began. Something for the migraines. I usually wait until it's late. Fewer people, fewer eyes. That night, the snow had already started, and the wind was biting. You could feel it in your teeth. He swallowed. His fingers brushed unconsciously against the seam of his jeans, like he was grounding himself. I heard it before I saw her. This barking sharp, panicked. I almost didn't go. Thought maybe it was just a stray tangled in trash. But something about the pitch, I don't know, it didn't sound like a dog asking for help. It sounded like a dog trying to give it. Hope let out a low breath beside him, barely audible. Elijah's eyes drifted. I found her behind the old hardware shop. She was soaked through, leaning against a crate like she couldn't stand anymore. And I saw the blood first on the snow. That color. It doesn't belong out there. He paused. Maria stayed silent. There were pups coming. Right there in the cold. No time to call anyone. No time to second guess. I wrapped her in my coat. I remember my arm going numb, trying to carry her without shifting her weight. She didn't fight, didn't bark. She just trusted me. His voice cracked slightly, a hairline fracture in steel. Hope turned her head then, slowly and deliberately, and nudged his elbow. Elijah's hand moved instinctively, fingers sliding into the thick fur at her neck. She gave birth in a supply closet. He whispered, no heat. No light, just me, her, and the storm, pounding outside like a war drum. He blinked, hard, as if driving something back down. I thought we were going to lose the first one. Scout. She wasn't breathing. I remember yelling, begging, trying everything I knew, and hoped she looked at me like she'd already accepted it. Not because she gave up, but because that's the life she's known. Loss. The silence between words expanded. Thick and palpable. And then just when I stopped shaking, Scout squeaked, a sound barely louder than a match strike. But to me, it was thunder. Elijah exhaled shakily. After that, I stayed. Couldn't leave. Couldn't stop thinking that if I walked away, she'd be another line in a forgotten report. Decommissioned K9, died during labor. Like she was defective, disposable. His voice grew tighter, strained with restraint. Too many good ones discarded that way. Men, dogs, doesn't matter. If you break, you disappear. There was a shift in the room then, something unspoken, but seen. Hope, still silent, stood up slowly. She looked at Elijah for a moment, those deep amber eyes holding more history than any camera could capture. Then, in one graceful motion, she stepped forward and laid her head gently in his lap. Elijah's hand trembled. The camera didn't move. Maria didn't speak. The moment stretched like breath held in a chapel. No stage direction, no cue. Just a dog once trained to track explosives and threats, now offering herself as something holier, refuge. "I didn't save her," Elijah whispered, hand trembling as he stroked Hope's ear. "She saved me. Every day since." His voice broke then, not dramatically, not loudly, just a fraying at the edges. A man who had spent years building walls only to realize they had kept more pain in than danger out. Maria let the camera run. Not out of insensitivity, but reverence. Some stories weren't meant to be interrupted. When the interview ended, Elijah stood slowly and walked to the window. The snow had thickened now, but it looked softer somehow, less punishing. Hope remained by the couch, lying between the tripod and the folded blanket pile. Scout stirred from her nap and crawled toward her mother's side. Maria turned off the camera, but her eyes remained glassy. "I'll cut the footage with care," she promised. "You'll see it before anyone else does." Elijah nodded, not looking at her. He didn't need to say thank you. The room had already said it for him. It aired at 6:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, slotted near the end of the local evening news just after the weather report, but before the sports recap, a spot where human interest stories usually faded like the echo of a commercial jingle. But this one struck different. Maria's voiceover was soft, reverent, the kind used in documentaries about war veterans and miracles. In the heart of last month's storm, a retired soldier named Elijah Ward carried not a weapon, but a wounded dog in labor through the snowdrifts of Red Hollow. What happened next has gripped this community by the collar of its heart. The footage was honest. No over-editing, no slow-motion dramatics. Just raw cuts of Elijah speaking, his voice measured, tired, but steady. Hope by his side, and then toward the end, Hope laying her head in his lap like she always knew where she belonged. The moment landed like a heartbeat skipped. By 7:30 p.m., it had been reposted on the station's website with the title, "A Veteran, a Mother, and 4 Lives Saved." The comment section exploded first with quiet admiration, then outrage. Not at Elijah, but at what Maria had hinted in her closing line. "But this family may still be torn apart pending city regulations and an upcoming inspection." By 8:12 p.m., someone clipped the footage to a 60-second vertical format and posted it on TikTok. By 8:47 p.m., the phrase, "number let them stay," was trending in-state. Back at the apartment, Elijah hadn't planned to watch it air. But Scout had refused to sleep. The pup pawed at the television stand, whining until Hope nuzzled the remote off the table. Carlos, who had dropped by with a casserole, not from the store this time, laughed, and turned the television on, just in time to catch the final seconds of the broadcast. Elijah stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, frozen mid-step. He heard his own voice, tinny and too honest. She wasn't just trying to survive. She was protecting life, and I couldn't walk away from that. Then he saw the shot Maria had kept until the very end. Hope resting her head on his lap, his hand shaking as it cradled her muzzle. No war medals, no action music, just grief wrapped in gratitude. Carlos wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve. "Damn," he whispered. "That's going to hit people where it counts." Elijah didn't say anything. He couldn't. The room felt too full, even though it was just them. By morning, the ripple had become a wave. Local shelters reposted the video with captions like, "This is why we fight for every animal," and "Not all heroes wear uniforms. Some wagtails." A city councilwoman from District 9 shared it with the caption, "I'll personally oppose any move to separate these animals. Thank you, Elijah, for your service then and now." Elijah's inbox, once barren, now overflowed. Messages from veterans, dog handlers, mothers, strangers. Most said, "Thank you." Some just sent pictures of their rescue dogs, their kids hugging mutts with cloudy eyes and gray muzzles. And then came the donations. First, a trickle. By noon, Maria called. "Do you have a minute?" "Sure," Elijah said, holding River in one arm and nudging the door shut with his foot. "We've just passed $12,000 in donations to Red Hollow Shelter. she said breathlessly. Food? Vet costs? Crates? Rehab funds? Someone offered to fund a puppy fostering program? And a church from the north side just volunteered to hold a weekend adoption fair. Elijah sat down on the floor, stunned. Hope patted over, tail gently swishing. He didn't know what to say. He didn't yet realize that Walsh had already seen it. Gregory Walsh sat in a leather-backed chair in his office at City Development. The clip played on his muted laptop. The image of Elijah petting Hope replayed as the bar across the bottom ticked forward. He tapped his pen once, twice. Then he smiled. But it wasn't a smile of warmth. It was calculation. He turned to his aide. Get me Dunham's report and the full zoning history of Red Hollow. I want to know every violation they've ever logged. Noise, safety, drainage. I want it on my desk before 3 p.m. The aide hesitated. Sir, given the response. I'm not shutting anything down, Walsh interrupted, his tone deceptively calm. Not yet, but I'm not letting a heartwarming clip derail 5 years of redevelopment either. We're not the bad guys here. We're the cleanup crew. Let's just make sure the mess stays visible. Back at the apartment, Elijah had no idea a storm was already gathering again. He watched the pups wobble after each other across the hallway like wind-up toys. Hope sat sentry by the door, ears twitching at every hallway creak. Carlos was hammering together a makeshift playpen out of old baby gates and a pair of folding chairs. Elijah was crouched in the corner, taping a new journal entry to the wall. It read, Day 17 Clover tried barking today. It came out like a cough, but she wagged her tail like she knew she'd done something brave. Underneath, he'd drawn a shaky paw print, traced from a sleepy scout. He stood up and stretched. His phone vibrated again, another message, another donation, another thank you from someone who said they hadn't cried in years until last night. He glanced over at Hope, who was watching him with that same patient, knowing, look, he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Whatever came next, they'd face it the same way they had faced the snow. Together. The knock came at 9:14 a.m. It wasn't like the others. Not hesitant. Not neighborly. 3 firm raps against the door, controlled, deliberate, and final, like a gavel meeting wood. Hope was already standing when Elijah stepped into the living room, her ears pinned forward, body rigid but composed. She didn't bark. She didn't move. She simply stood between the door and the pups, gaze locked on the wood as if she could see through it. Elijah rested a hand on her shoulder. She didn't flinch. Stay, he whispered. Then he opened the door. Gregory Walsh stood in the hallway, wearing a tailored navy coat and an expression like polished steel. At his side was Officer Dunham, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the apartment even before being invited in. Elijah Ward? Walsh asked, though he already knew. Elijah didn't offer a handshake. You're here about the dogs. We're here about violations, Walsh replied. Unregistered litters. Unauthorized housing of active-duty canines. Public health questions. Nous ordonnances. Dunham cleared her throat, softer in tone. It's a routine review, Mr. Ward, in light of recent attention. She was trying. Her voice wasn't cold this time. She remembered Hope from before. Walsh didn't wait. He stepped forward. But Hope didn't move. She didn't growl, didn't block. She simply stared at him, an unblinking barrier of fur and focus. For a moment, Walsh hesitated. It was barely noticeable. A flicker of tension across the jawline. Then, he stepped around her. Elijah nodded once toward the kitchen. This way. He had prepared for this. The table was cleared, save for the binder thick, well kept, marked with a post-it in military precision. Puppy development log, Ward, Hope. Next to it, a folder labeled Veterinary Visits sat open, revealing receipts, appointment cards, and a vaccination schedule color, coded by puppy. Behind it, propped against a mason jar of pens, was a printed enrichment rotation chart. Tuesday, sound exposure. Thursday, scent puzzles. Saturday, supervised yard time at Carlos's property. Dunham's brows lifted slightly. She reached for the binder. Elijah let her. Every pup weighed daily. Entries include stool consistency, hydration levels, and behavioral notes, he said. tone flat but controlled. They're paper-trained to 78% success rate. Hope is fully housebroken. I documented all training methods used positive reinforcement only. Dunham flipped through the pages. Her lips parted once, as if to comment, then closed again. Meanwhile, Walsh didn't sit. He stood at the window, hands behind his back, staring at the snowy courtyard, like he was deciding how to rearrange it. "You're not licensed as a breeder," he said finally. "I'm not a breeder," Elijah replied. "This wasn't intentional. It was rescue. You're not licensed as a shelter either. But Red Hollow is. And Maria's segment made clear that they're working with me until the pups are old enough for transfer." Walsh turned slowly. "So, you admit this is a foster operation?" Elijah met his gaze. "I admit I'm the only one who carried her out of a collapsed shed while she was bleeding and in labor. I admit I was the only option between her living or dying." Hope stepped forward, sitting by Elijah's right foot. Calm, upright, present. Dunham paused in her notes. "She hasn't taken her eyes off you since we entered," she said softly. "That's not typical for a postpartum dog under stress. Most would be pacing or hiding." "She's not typical," Elijah replied. Dunham looked down at the pup nearest her, Clover, who blinked up from the dog bed with sleepy confidence. The pups weren't caged. They weren't frantic. They were nestled in a warm corner lined with towels and teething toys. One was chewing on a knotted rope shaped like a duck. Walsh crossed the room to the pups. Hope's gaze snapped to him, but she stayed still. "I've read your file, Ward," Walsh said. "I know what you've seen, and I'm not here to discredit it. But this," he gestured to the apartment, "the dogs, the warmth, is not how cities work. Sentiment doesn't overrule regulation. Emotion doesn't equal infrastructure." Elijah's voice was quiet. "And politics doesn't equal purpose." For the first time, Walsh's composure slipped. Just for a second, Dunham stepped between them. "Mr. Walsh, if I may," she said, "there are no immediate code violations. The conditions are sanitary. Documentation is above standards, frankly, and Hope is not a threat. She exhibits controlled behavior, protective but not aggressive. I recommend continuing temporary fostering under Red Hollow's oversight." Walsh stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "I didn't ask for your recommendation yet." "No," she replied carefully, "but it's my name on the compliance form." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Scout, a little slower than her siblings, stumbled across the hardwood and plopped herself between Hope's front legs. She gave a yawning squeak and curled her body around her mother's paw. Hope bent down and gently nuzzled her daughter, eyes never leaving the two humans in front of her. Dunham exhaled something like reverence. "She's not just raising them," she whispered. "She's teaching them, like she remembers what it meant to serve." Walsh's jaw tightened. He turned away from the pups, brushing invisible dust from his cuff. "You'll hear from the board within 72 hours. And then, to Dunham, we're done." After they left, Elijah stood at the door for a long time, watching their figures retreat through the hallway. Hope was beside him. She didn't wag her tail. She didn't lick his hand. She just stood there, a soldier beside her own. And when he finally closed the door, he whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "They saw you. That's all I needed." Hope leaned against his leg, the weight of her both grounding and sacred. Outside, the wind blew soft against the glass. Inside, for the first time since that stormy night, Elijah felt steady. He hadn't won yet, but he hadn't lost either. Not when he had her. The door clicked shut behind them, but the silence didn't settle. It hovered, like smoke after gunfire, thin, acrid, uncertain. Elijah stood still for a moment longer, his hand resting on the knob, as though letting go of it too soon might unravel something. Hope remained planted by his side, chest lifting and falling in quiet steadiness. The pups behind them stirred in their bedding, unaware of the tension that had hung in the air like a thread drawn taut. He turned finally and crossed back into the living room. Carlos was already there, seated on the edge of the couch, having slipped in during the inspection as moral backup. His coffee sat untouched, steam long faded. "Well?" Carlos asked, his voice low but edged with hope. Elijah let out a breath that sounded more like a warning sigh than relief. "No citations," he said. "Not one." Carlos blinked, then grinned. "That's good, right?" Elijah didn't answer. He walked over to the binder still lying open on the table and closed it gently. A slow victory, the kind that doesn't come with fanfare, only fatigue. Across the room, Hope shifted her weight slightly. Her ears twitched, then pivoted toward the hallway. Before Elijah could react, the knock returned. Softer this time. Just 2 taps. He opened the door again. Walsh stood there, alone now. His coat was folded over one arm, revealing crisp shirt sleeves and the glint of a monogrammed cufflink. No entourage, no clipboard. His expression was unreadable. "I just wanted to leave you with this," he said. His tone was less confrontational than earlier, but colder, somehow. Tired. He pulled a tri-folded letter from his coat pocket and extended it toward Elijah. Elijah didn't reach for it immediately. He waited. "This is not a violation notice," Walsh clarified. "Just formal acknowledgement that your case remains open. Final determination pending." "Pending what?" Elijah asked. Walsh gave the faintest shrug. "Review, additional input, internal discussion, translation, stall tactics." "Translation," Walsh replied, "is subjective." That might have been the end of it, some bureaucratic jab to end on, but just then, something small and unexpected interrupted the moment. A tiny blur of tan fur waddled between Elijah's legs and toddled straight toward the doorway. Scout, she moved with all the coordination of a wind-up toy, ears too big for her head, legs too short to be dignified. Her destination was clear: the stranger in the doorway. Walsh stiffened as the puppy reached his shoe and gently placed one paw on the polished leather. He didn't move, didn't retreat. He just stared down in baffled stillness. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Hope appeared. Not with speed or alarm, just quiet certainty. She walked up, lowered her head, and scooped Scout by the scruff with maternal grace. No growl, no theatrics, just a dignified retrieval. She turned away from the man in the doorway as if the interruption hadn't warranted any more of her attention. Walsh watched her walk back toward the room tail straight, posture serene, then turned his eyes to Elijah. "I'll admit," he said, voice quieter now, "she's unlike any I've seen." Elijah said nothing. "There's something old in her eyes," Walsh added, almost to himself. "Like she's seen things we don't write down." Elijah finally spoke. "She has." Walsh held his gaze another beat. Then he nodded once and stepped back. "You'll hear from us, eventually." And then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway until they were swallowed by the hum of the building. Inside, Carlos let out a breath that could have passed for a prayer. "Did that just happen?" he asked. Elijah didn't answer. He was already kneeling beside Hope, who had gently returned Scout to the dog bed. The pup was curled again in the familiar crook of her mother's front legs, none the wiser of the metaphor she'd just enacted. Elijah ran a hand through his hair, then rested his palm on Hope's neck. "That was the quietest stand I've ever seen," he murmured. Hope turned her head slightly and met his eyes. No barking, no show, just presence, just clarity. Carlos leaned back against the couch. "He didn't leave happy. He didn't leave satisfied either," Elijah said, "which is the best we can ask for." They sat in stillness for a while, the heater kicking in with a soft hum. Outside, a single bird chirped a lone note against the hush of winter. Later that evening, Elijah returned to the binder and removed the folder containing the intake report, the one he'd printed, after finding Hope's old K-9 registration had been quietly archived under a retired flag. He flipped to the page listing her final handler. The name was redacted, but the remarks weren't: "Removed from active duty due to non-compliance during heat. Recommendation: decommission. Subject displayed no aggression. Protective instincts heightened. Potential for non-combat support." It wasn't even a full paragraph. He looked down at the pups, all 5 breathing softly in their dream puddle of fur and peace. Hope curled around them, one eye half open. "She was never broken," Elijah said aloud, voice gentle. "She just wasn't useful to them anymore." Hope didn't stir, but her ears shifted just enough to say, "I heard you." That night, Elijah stood by the window longer than usual, arms crossed against his chest as the city lights blinked faintly beyond the frost-glazed glass. He thought about Walsh, about the veiled threat in his wording. Still under review, a phrase that didn't promise danger but didn't guarantee safety either. They hadn't lost, but they hadn't won either. A draw, maybe. The kind you walk away from still bracing for the next hit. But for now, there was this. A family intact, A bond that held, a puppy brave enough to approach a man made of stone, and a mother who, without speaking, made clear, "We will not be moved. No fault. No victory, but no surrender." And sometimes in the middle chapters of a war that doesn't know its ending, that's everything. The hallway light had barely stopped swaying from Walsh's departure when Officer Dunham reappeared, clipboard now tucked beneath her arm like an afterthought rather than a weapon. Her cap was off, revealing short chestnut hair pressed flat by the day's tension. "Elijah," she said, voice pitched low so it wouldn't carry past the doorframe. "I only have a minute." Hope rose from her post inside the apartment, padded forward, and sat beside Elijah. No sound, just that steady amber gaze, the one that seemed to read the air long before words arrived. Dunham glanced at the shepherd, then back to Elijah. "He's not finished." "I know," Elijah answered. "No, you don't." She took a breath. "Walsh can't nail you on housing conditions, so he'll squeeze the shelter instead. Budget reviews, code audits, zoning challenges, make them too busy or too broke to keep backing you. If Eastview folds, your temporary foster status folds with it." Elijah absorbed the hit in silence. Behind him, the pups squeaked in their sleep, oblivious to the politics circling like hawks outside a henhouse. "When will he move?" he asked. "Soon. He'll wait just long enough for the public attention to cool. Then file paperwork when no one's watching." Hope leaned into Elijah's leg, a quiet counterweight to the dread pooling in his stomach. Dunham's eyes softened. "You need allies. Loud ones. Media helps, but policy's louder. Letters to council members, petitions, vets who'll testify the dog and pups are thriving. Build it now before he guts the shelter's budget hearings." She pressed a business card into his hand. "That's my personal number. If you get another notice, don't wait." Elijah nodded. "Why are you risking this?" "Because," she said, glancing at Hope, "I joined animal control to protect animals, not pad a developer's resume." Then she was gone, boots echoing away down the stairs. Night settled thick and still, but Elijah's mind ticked like a field radio. He cleared the kitchen table, swept aside the feeding log, the open jar of puppy kibble, the half-scribbled haiku Carlos had left as a joke. Tiny pause, per H easier than guilt, breathe easy. In their place, he laid out blank notebook pages, a laptop, a city district map printed from an old zoning PDF. Column 1. Media. Maria's segment. Edit clips for social shorts. Local podcast. Pause. Policy. Invite. Letters to Saturday papers. Op-ed angle equals veteran plus working dog equals civic asset. Column 2. Policy. List council seats. Note who's up for re-election. Identify Shelter Oversight Subcommittee Chair. Craft testimony. Data on K, the 9th of December emission failures. Cost of shutting shelter versus rehab. Column 3. Community. Launch petition. Number Let Them Stay Now. Number Guardians of Hope. Carlos. Organize neighborhood supply drive. Collect signatures. Ellie. Vet Coalition Statement on Humane Fostering. Each heading became a trench line on paper. Arrows branching to action items. Deadlines. Names. It felt strangely familiar, like planning a medevac route through hostile streets, except the coordinates were emails and city hall addresses, and the evacuees were a mother dog and 4 pups who had never heard gunfire. Every few minutes he looked up, calibrating his resolve against the quiet room. Hope watched from the rug, eyes half closed but alert to every shift in his breathing. Scout, sensing nocturnal adventure, tottered out of the nest, climbed his boot, and collapsed in a brave sprawl across his laces. Elijah scooped her up, settling the warm bundle against his chest. "Recon team, reporting," he muttered, a grin breaking despite the weight of the moment. He opened a new email draft to Maria. Need follow-up piece. Focus on city budget threat to Eastview. Interviews with vets and adopters. Urgent. He clicked save, not send. Words had to be precise, like dosage. Too strong and the public tuned out. Too weak and Walsh slipped past. The clock edged past midnight. Snow tapped gently at the window, a softer rhythm than the hard rain of that first night. The pups were quiet again. Hope rose, stretched, and walked to his side. She didn't crowd him. She simply leaned her shoulder against his thigh, her weight a calm, living gravity that pulled him from the whirl of plans back to the pulse of why he was doing this. Elijah set down the pen, rested his palm on her head. "We're in this together," he said. Hope exhaled, a sound like a sigh and an oath all at once. He looked around the apartment at the quilt folded as a makeshift whelping pad, at the playpen cobbled from baby gates and parachute cord, at the binder whose pages proved care no ordinance could deny, and realize the battle lines had shifted. This wasn't a war zone of dust and distant orders. It was a living room. But the stakes felt the same. Lives hanging on paperwork, futures balanced on public will. He pressed his forehead to Hope's, "I won't let them turn you into a file number again." Her tail thumped once steady, certain. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the plan took shape. A campaign built not of ammunition but of testimonies, signatures, and stories powerful enough to outshout a developer's budget sheet. Elijah inhaled, the air cool but kinder than any he'd breathed in years. Tomorrow, they'd rally vets who owed their sanity to dogs like Hope. Tomorrow, he'd call every council office until someone listened. Tomorrow, the war would be fought with words and witness. But tonight, strategy could rest. He scooped Scout from his lap and returned her to the warm nod of her siblings. Hope circled once, then settled beside them, one protective paw draped across the pile. Elijah flicked off the desk lamp, letting darkness settle like a blanket. The storm had passed. Another loomed, yet under his roof, against his leg, a silent promise held. And sometimes he thought, as he drifted toward sleep, that's all the armor you need. Saturday morning sunlight bounced off the snowbanks, flooding Elijah's apartment with hopeful light. He blinked at the brightness, amazed to remember what a clean sky looked like. Hope lay near the whelping pen, ears twitching at every puppy sound. 4 pups, 4 heartbeats, still safe. His phone chimed. "Carlos, big night tonight. Community center, 6 p.m., bring Hope if she's up for it. We're making noise." A flyer attached read, "Save Eastview Shelter. Protect our pack," with a photo of Hope resting on Elijah's lap. Elijah replied, "We'll be there." At the community center, Carlos stood ready with posters and petitions. His voice beamed. "We've got chili, live streams, and art booths. All we need is our star." Hope stepped from the truck, tail calm and confident. She moved beside Elijah with grace, as though she'd trained for this her whole life. Inside, the hall filled quickly. Families, seniors, council aides. Ellie arrived with charts and gave Hope a gentle greeting before turning to Elijah. "You ready?" "As ready as I was pulling shrapnel from Captain Monroe with a multi-tool." Ellie smiled. That worked out. He walked again. "Let's hope tonight stands up too." Miss Henley, the moderator, opened the meeting. "We're here to discuss Council File 2201, B, cutting funding to Eastview Shelter." But the room came alive with Ellie's presentation photos of Hope in uniform, then abandoned, now radiant. "These dogs don't fail," she said. "We do. Eastview catches what others drop." Applause echoed. Signatures followed. "For the puppies. One dog saved my life in Kabul." Elijah stood at the back, unsure if he'd speak. Hope nudged his knee. He walked to the mic. "I'm Elijah Ward, former Marine Corps medic." Cameras tilted. Silence fell. "I won't talk about deployments. I want to talk about what comes after when the noise stops, but the echoes stay." He looked to Hope. "They say these are just dogs, replaceable. But when I found Hope in that storm, she wasn't asking for rescue. She was offering it." He held up a folder of charts. "These aren't numbers. They're promises. Proof that life rebounds when surrounded by care." He paused. "They're not just dogs. They're family. Eastview gave them a chance. We take that away. We decide who's worth remembering." The room burst into applause. Hope let out one quiet bark. Later, under the stars, Elijah exhaled deeply. "We did it," he whispered to Hope, who leaned against him. He felt, for the first time in years, that he didn't carry the future alone. Clover, still answering to Scout, burst through the hallway, nose to the ground, tail spinning. Elijah followed her with his camera. Click. She tripped over a shoe, helmeted in its hollow. Click. Hope watched from near the heater, patient. Flint followed next, slow and thoughtful. Elijah caught a photo as Flint laid a paw over a squeaky toy like a quiet claim. Hope nudged him, a mother's encouragement. Click. River exploded into the room, tail smacking everything. Clover pounced back in. Nova emerged, tiny and serious, barked once order. River sat, click. Elijah whispered, "Diplomat in training." M. Hope rumbled low agreement. Maybe pride. River gnawed a chair leg. Hope redirected him to a chew toy. Click. Elijah smiled. Proof of life, not survival. His camera once documented war. Now it captured wagging tails. Hope began something new, selecting one pup when visitors arrived, nudging them forward. A lesson. Strangers weren't threats. Elijah saw her not just as a mother, but as a retired working dog passing on what she knew. Today, she sent Scout first. The pup scrambled into Elijah's lap, heart thumping like a bird's. Hope watched calmly. "You're teaching them to trust," he said. She blinked, yes. Ellie arrived for checkups. Hope looked at the door, then at Elijah. He nodded. "Permission granted." "The beans are thriving," Ellie laughed as pups swarmed her shoes. Click. Flint's up 100 grams. Nova's coat is perfect. River's appetite still terrifying. Hope supervised while Ellie logged data. Elijah flipped the camera screen. Hope nudging Flint forward. Ellie's voice cracked. "She's letting go." "I'm trying to follow her lead," Elijah said. Volunteers trickled in, students, carpenters, siblings. Each time, Hope selected a pup to meet them. Practice for parting. She was preparing long before goodbye. Later, Elijah reviewed photos. Scout in mid-pounce. Nova shepherding River. Flint nosing Ellie's stethoscope. Hope patted over. Head under his hand. "Almost time to let them go," he whispered. She thumped her tail agreement. He saved the final image. Hope silhouetted in sunlight. 4 shadows curled at her feet. Caption. "She's teaching them how to leave. I'm learning how to let them." Night settled soft. Elijah sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand. 4 envelopes stacked beside him. Clover, Flint, Nova, River. Carlos had called it their first love letters. Elijah wrote carefully. To Clover. "She'll want a mission. Give her one." She was the first heartbeat I felt after a very long winter. To Flint. "He's cautious, not afraid. Sit beside him, and he'll bring you every secret the day held." To Nova. "She mends storms. Let her work her quiet magic." To River. "If he chews your world to splinters, remember he's building doors." He leaned back, heart aching. Hope rose. She nudged Scout gently toward Elijah. 3rd time that week. Scout sat at his boot, looked up. Elijah scooped her into his lap. Hope watched, solemn. A commander passing command. "You're persistent," Elijah whispered. "Trying to convince me you're the one who stays?" Scout licked his knuckle. Tail swished. The thought had grown roots. Morning walks, quiet nights, Scout by his side. Partner Junior Edition. He could keep her. Hope would allow it. But then she crossed to him, placed her chin on Scout's shoulders. It wasn't goodbye. It was a commissioning. Scout didn't need to stay because she was ready to leave. Tears welled. He kissed her head, then placed her back on the rug. Hope curled beside her. He pulled fresh paper and wrote one final letter. "Dear me, your duty was never to keep them, only to start them on the road you found too late to walk. When each tale leaves, carry the echo, not the absence. And remember, beginnings were enough." He folded it into his journal. Hope leaned into his side. "We did our part," he whispered. "I'll do the rest." Her tail swept his ankle. A silent amen. Outside, the breeze stirred the snow. Inside, 5 letters glowed in lamplight, written in hope, sealed in love. Monday brought trouble. Elijah felt it before he even opened his inbox. 15 urgent emails, missed calls from Ellie, a single message from Maria. "Check your voicemail. Now." He did. "Elijah, it's Ellie. Walsh filed motion 12-74 to divert shelter funds to beautification projects. If it passes, Eastview closes in 60 days. Hope's permit ends too. Call me." 60 days. Carlos burst in, waving a paper. "He's doing it! Walsh got 3 co-sponsors. They're calling it taxpayer efficiency." The motion's language was sterile, cutting. essential animal fostering funds to be redirected. Hope padded to Elijah's side. Sensing the shift, "He's risking Ellie's job," Carlos said. "And if Eastview folds, the pups lose everything." When's public comment? Thursday night. 2 minutes per speaker. Maria wants you to open. The thought of speaking twisted Elijah's gut. Fluorescent lights, crowds, memories of war zones. But hope nudged his hand steady as always. Later, in the clinic, Ellie looked up. "If this passes, they terminate my contract. Without me, Eastview loses state status. Animals left behind get transferred or euthanized." Elijah's hands balled into fists. Ellie added, "They'll dismiss us as emotional. We need impact metrics. Canine therapy, PTSD reductions, dollar value. Your story backed by numbers." He remembered blood pressure charts, pup logs, his heart rate when Scout slept beside him. "I'll speak," he said. 2 minutes, Ellie warned. Every syllable a nail. That night, his apartment turned into a strategy bunker. Carlos organized speakers. Maria cut together video. Ellie compiled vet records. Elijah spread out studies, photos, cost sheets. He wrote, asterisk, return on compassion. $1 spent fostering saves $5. Asterisk, public safety. Canine second lower strain on mental health budgets. Asterisk, the heart. They already served this city once. Hope moved calmly, checking pups, nudging Elijah when his pen stalled. By midnight, he rehearsed his lines with her fur under his palm. "They'll hear us," he whispered. Thursday came with gray skies and nervous air. Elijah dressed in the last decent shirt from his service years. Kneeling to Hope, he whispered, "Stay with Carlos tonight. I'll handle this part." Hope licked the scar above his brow. Council chambers were full. Neighbors, veterans, teens with handmade signs. Ellie nodded from the speaker row. Maria's camera rolled. Carlos flashed a thumbs up. "Elijah Ward," the chair announced. The podium loomed. Elijah steadied his breath. "I served 10 years as a combat medic. I thought I knew triage, what lives to save. Then one night behind the old Wexler plant, triage found me. Slide. Hope in snow. Pregnant. Abandoned. She wasn't asking for rescue. She was offering it." His voice trembled. "That cry, it rewired me. Different war, same plea, don't leave me." Slide. Hope with Scout in his lap. Hope trusted a stranger. Eastview honored that trust. This motion calls her paperwork non-essential. You know what that means. It means it's cheaper to kill her than keep her. Murmurs rose. He held up a laminated page. Foster cost $312. Euthanize $622. And those pups? They visited veterans' homes. Metrics prove it. Lowered anxiety, improved morale. Slide. River with a vet in a wheelchair. Hope taught them to meet the world kindly. She taught me to speak again. Remove this funding, and we silence that voice. He looked at Walsh. Her first cry said, "Stay. I ask this council to do the same." The timer chimed. 2 minutes. Thunderous applause followed. Even the gavel waited. Back in his seat, Ellie gripped his arm. Carlos whispered a prayer swear. Elijah felt something lift like a burden finally passed on. Public comments followed, dozens inspired by his words. When they began quoting Sergeant Ward, Elijah understood he had become a voice. Friday morning arrived with drizzle and tension. Reporters buzzed. Council reconvened. Walsh tried again. "Fiscal responsibility." Madam Chair interrupted. "Over 9,800 signatures. Public interest is clear. We vote." Votes echoed one by one. 5, 3. The motion failed. Cheers exploded. Hope was safe. Ellie exhaled years of fear. Carlos whooped. Elijah sat motionless, fingers on the bench, grounding himself. Outside, reporters clamored. Elijah stepped up only once. Hope carried her family out of a blizzard, he said. Today, this city carried them the rest of the way. Back home, River tackled his boots. Nova circled. Scout perched on blankets. Then Hope emerged, watching him. "It's done," Elijah whispered. She leaned in. He felt the shift, the weight of survival traded for safety. Carlos came bearing cupcakes. Ellie held fresh grant letters. "They want Hope's pups in the brochure," she said. Scout yipped. River pounced. Flint sighed. Nova refereed. Elijah laughed, lifting Scout. "You knew we'd get here." Hope thumped her tail. "Obviously." That night, after the others left, Elijah opened the balcony. Cool air, jasmine, puppy scent. He breathed deep, unhindered for the first time in years. Hope joined him, scanning the quiet street like a soldier off duty, but still alert. "I thought safety was silence," Elijah said. "Turns out it's people who stand together." Hope's ear twitched. "Amen." Inside, Scout whimpered a sleepy request for company. Hope padded back in. Elijah followed. Freedom wasn't absence of threat. It was trust returned. It was choosing to stay. The morning broke crisp and clear, as if April itself had exhaled. Sunlight glazed the Eastview courtyard, turning dew to silver. A handmade banner arched above the gate. "Finding forever homes, Hope's puppies." Elijah stood inside the chain link, heart thudding with quiet anticipation. Around him, volunteers moved swiftly. Adoption packets, leash sets, jars of dog biscuits tied with twine. Carlos barked cheerful orders. Ellie double-checked the vaccine cooler. Then came the families. First were the Millers, a gentle couple bearing a blanket that smelled of their old Labrador. Nova approached calmly, nose quivering. Elijah handed over Nova's letter and a rubber tug toy. Snap. Papers signed. Nova trotted between her new guardians, tail waving like a quiet flag. Then came Mr. Alvarez, a widower. His hand shook until Flint leaned into his knee. Elijah saw the man's grief ease in that contact. Flint's letter was slipped into a worn wallet. Snap. Papers signed. Flint turned once for permission. Elijah nodded. One bark. Flint was gone. River left in a flurry, tumbling into the laps of the giggling Saunders twins. Ellie gave a warning list. "Hide your socks, bolt your trash cans." Elijah passed over River's envelope and a damp rope toy. River yawned, mid-photo. Pink tongue flopped like a ribbon. 3 gone. Only Scout remained. Then a black sedan pulled up. A woman stepped out. Rachel then opened the door for her daughter. She was maybe 8, with auburn braids, freckles, and wide, observant eyes. A teddy bear dangled from one hand. Elijah's breath caught. Her name was Lily, and something about her, the grace in her stillness, punched straight through him. His late sister had been named Grace, Scout noticed. She trotted forward, sniffed, then climbed into Lily's lap like it was her rightful place. From the maple's shade, Hope watched, tail-tapping slow approval. Rachel approached. "We lost our shepherd last winter. Lily hasn't smiled like this since." Elijah swallowed emotion. He crouched beside Lily and offered the envelope. "Her name's Scout. She's curious, loyal, and a little wild. Hide treats, she'll find them. Sit quietly, she'll come." Lily whispered, "I'll take care of her. Promise." Elijah placed the felt fox and letter into Lily's backpack. "She already believes you." Snap. Papers signed. Time to say goodbye. He hugged Scout to his chest one last time. She smelled like sawdust and spring of everything that had come after the storm. "Go light the maps, little soldier," he whispered. Then he placed her in Lily's arms. Hope stepped forward. She sniffed Lily's shoe, hand, and Scout's ear, then gently licked the girl's knuckles. Approval sealed. She stepped back, tail thumping once. Twice a watch ended. Rachel and Lily turned to leave. Scout barked once sharp, bright, and followed. The courtyard fell quiet. Tables were folded, posters taken down. Ellie dabbed at her eyes behind a clipboard. Carlos hugged her. Volunteers drifted off. Elijah stood still in the center. Hope beside him. "They're gone," he said, not mournful, just true. Hope leaned into him. Her shoulders no longer bore the weight of survival. Her pups were safe. Her mission was done. "Home?" Elijah asked. Hope's tail swept the ground. "Yes." She walked beside him, leashless, like always bound not by rope but by trust. The apartment felt cavernous without puppies. No paw scrambles, no squeaks, no morning chaos, just the tick of the wall clock and the hush of soft April rain. Elijah tried the bed, the couch, but each space echoed with absence. Flint's snore, River's rustling, Nova's nudge. Even the air tasted still, like something had been packed away. 2:07 a.m. Still awake, Hope emerged from the hallway. She paused in the doorway, a question in her gaze. Elijah patted the quilt beside him. She circled once, then settled at his side, pressing against him. He matched his breath to hers, slow, grounding. But sleep didn't come. His mind played memory flickers. Scout nestled in Lily's lap, Flint's bark goodbye, Nova's calm, River's wild tailspin. Beautiful images, each laced with ache. Quiet house, he murmured. Hope shifted. Then, with purpose, laid her head in his lap, the exact gesture from that first night in the blizzard-wrecked factory. Back then, it was a question. Can I trust you? Now, it was an answer. You did good. Rest. Elijah's throat tightened. He stroked her ears, feeling the healed fur, the strength beneath. They're safe, he whispered. All four. Out there living stories, we only started. Hope's tail thumped. The room held its breath. Rain tapped the window in lullaby. Elijah's thoughts wandered council chambers that icy night. Scout's first cry. Now 4 hearts beating in new homes. It was never just about rescue. It was about release. He rested a hand across Hope's back, and for the first time, in a long time, felt the stillness not as emptiness, but peace. Yet something tugged at him, an ember of restlessness. For months he'd poured every waking moment into feeding schedules, vet visits, policy battles, morning photos. Now the mission was complete, and his muscles still braced for orders that wouldn't come. He glanced at the hallway where the whelping pen once stood. Only a square of brighter floorboards marked its absence. Hope huffed softly, as if reading his thoughts. Her gaze lifted, locking with his deep amber pools, holding a calm older than war or politics. In them, he saw no loneliness, only invitation. He scratched beneath her collar. "You're staying," he said. The words barely more than breath, yet ringing like cathedral bells in the quiet. "You hear me? This home's yours as long as you want it." Hope's eyes softened. She closed them, exhaled, and her whole body settled heavier against his legs, the full, unguarded trust of a soldier off duty at last. A knot inside Elijah loosened. The apartment no longer felt empty. It felt spacious, ready. Walls once cramped by crates and chew, toys now beckoned for something new. A reading chair by the window maybe, or a desk where letters to adopted pups could be written on birthdays. Plans unfurled like green shoots after frost. The clock ticked. 2:29 a.m. Rain eased to a patter. Wind slipped through the cracked balcony door, carrying the scent of lilac budding along the alley fence. Elijah inhaled deeply, lungs filling without hitch or haste, then rested his head back against the quilt edge. He thought of Hope's name, a word tossed onto a collar years ago, nearly erased by abandonment. Tonight, it glowed like a neon sign in the dark. Hope stays. In the apartment, yes, but more importantly, in the soft tissue of his reawakening life, in letters, in testimonies. In every stride, he and she would take visiting veterans who needed the same trust she'd gifted him. His eyelids grew heavy, the ceiling cracks blurring into gentle rivers. Before sleep claimed him, he whispered one final promise into the fur beneath his fingertips. "No more winter for us, partner. Just different kinds of spring." Hope's tail brushed his ankle agreement, benediction, and together they drifted into the first quiet night that felt wholly, irreversibly theirs. 3 months after the adoption day and nearly a year since a blizzard stitched 2 broken souls together, Elijah eased his truck through the wrought iron gates of the Hopes-packed Canine and Veteran Wellness Center. Fresh paint still gleamed on the sign, letters crisp in navy and gold. Service forged, service returned. The building had once been an abandoned public works depot. Squat brick, busted windows, rusting chain link. Now wildflowers rimmed a new fence. Solar panels winked on the roof, an access ramp curved like a welcoming arm toward double glass doors. Inside waited 6 retired Canine Second, a half-dozen veterans in various stages of re-entry, 2 therapy counselors, and an air thick with promise. In the passenger seat, Hope rose, paws braced on the dashboard, nose quivering at a symphony of scents, fresh sod, varnished pine, distant dog biscuits. Her tail swept an eager tempo. Elijah smiled, parking beneath a newly planted maple. "Ready, partner?" He clipped her leash formality more than necessity and stepped into sunlight that smelled of cut grass and possibility. Wind rustled the maple leaves, whispering a memory of the factory storm and contrasting it with this dawn-bright day. Maria met them at the entrance, camera slung at her hip. "Grand opening video's trending already," she said, grin wide. People love redemption stories, especially when they shed. She scratched behind Hope's ear, star of the show. Inside, the entry hall buzzed. Volunteers, taping name badges, dogs trotting alongside wheelchairs, local news microphones searching for uplift. Elijah's boots clicked on polished concrete, striped with paw print stencils, leading to different wings. Training hall, quiet kennels, veteran lounge. At the corridor's far end hung 4 framed photographs. Nova curled around an elderly woman's slippers. Flint, in therapy, dog vest beside Mr. Sade. Alvarez, river muddy, pawed atop a jungle gym with the twins. Scout ears perked, eyes bright watching Lily practice piano. Beneath the gallery a plaque read, "First graduates of..." Elijah paused, throat tight, pride and melancholia mingling like twin rivulets. Hope nudged his thigh as if to say, "They're fine, keep moving." In the training hall repurposed from the depot's old loading bay, rubberized mats spanned the floor. Agility hurdles stood ready, and folding chairs ringed the perimeter. Ellie, sporting a teal polo embroidered with the center's logo, guided a black lab through scent-tracking drills while a Marine in a prosthetic leg watched, rapt. At the far wall, Carlos argued cheerily with an architect about the merits of installing a puppy cam mezzanine for live streams. Posters lined the brick. Anxiety alert behaviors, positive reinforcement basics, mutual rescue. When you heal, they heal. Elijah unclipped Hope's leash, her cue to roam, and she trotted straight to a nervous shepherd mix whose ears lay flat against his skull. One gentle nose bump, a low reassuring rumble, and the dog's tense shoulders eased. The veteran handler, a wiry woman named Torres, exhaled audible relief. "She's got magic in her," she murmured. "Practice," Elijah said, approaching. "And patience." He knelt, demonstrating how to present a steady palm, how to breathe belly, deep so the dog mirrors calm. Torres followed, shoulders lowering. The shepherd licked her hand. Ellie signaled from across the room. "Elijah, you're on in 5. He ran a hand down Hope's back. "Work to do." 30 chairs filled, a mosaic of uniforms past and present. Army, Navy, Air Force, and one orange tabby cat patch on a biker vest. Hope sat at Elijah's left heel, eyes scanning the room, posture relaxed but ready. Elijah cleared his throat, sunlight slanting through skylights onto his shoulders. "Welcome to Hope's Pact," he began, voice amplified by little more than conviction. This center was built from 3 truths. 1. Dogs who served deserve a life beyond the muzzle. 2. People who served sometimes need a silent language to find their words again. 3. Healing isn't a charity, it's a partnership. Nods rippled. He shared the short version, the storm, the supply closet, Scout's first breath, the council fight. Each detail anchored to a lesson. Listen before you lead, trade fear for tasks. Celebrate small victories like first tail wags after nightmares. Hope demonstrated with subtle cues, touching a trembling knee, nudging a dropped cane back within reach. Elijah ended with logistics, feeding schedules, vet rotations, volunteer orientation. Then he stepped aside. Hope, on practice signal, trotted to a low platform and lay down front paws crossed icon of composed support. Questions flew. How do I start trust exercises? What if the dog panics at fireworks? Elijah answered patiently, weaving science with story. Each time his gaze caught the photos of the pups on the wall, a warmth settled deeper in his chest. At break, a young serviceman named Kemp approached. Scar tissue pulled at the corner of his eye. His breath hitched as he spoke. "I haven't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in 3 years. Think this'll help?" Elijah placed a gentle hand on Kemp's shoulder. Hope stepped forward, offered a soft muzzle. Kemp stroked her fur once, twice, and his shoulders sagged weight, exiting, not collapsing. "She saved me first," Elijah said quietly. "Now, it's my turn to share." Kemp swallowed hard. "Then maybe there's a chance." Late afternoon, they gathered outside for the formal ribbon cutting. A line of veterans held the scarlet strip. Council members flanked them, including 2 who had voted nay on Walsh's motion. Ellie handed Elijah a pair of gold-handled shears. He hesitated, looking down at Hope. Her tail swished. "Do it." Blades closed with a crisp snip. Applause burst. Balloons lifted. Cameras flashed. Hope barked once, joyous. Maria's microphone caught Elijah's parting words to the crowd. "Hope gave me back my voice. This place ensures neither man nor dog is left in silence again." The cheer that followed felt like wind at sea, buoyant, boundless. Dusk painted the center's facade rose gold as volunteers headed home. Inside, soft kennel lights glowed. Classical guitar hummed through speakers. Elijah walked corridor rounds, ensuring blankets were tucked, water bowls fresh. At the last suite, he paused Hope's corner. A raised bed, basket of toys, her name stitched onto a navy canvas sign. She jumped onto the bed but didn't curl up. Instead, she padded back to him, head bumping his thigh. He sat on the floor. She climbed halfway onto his lap, 45 pounds of gratitude, and sighed. Outside, crickets began their cadence. Elijah looked around. Walls of warm brick, air rich with quiet hope, corridors soon to echo with new beginnings. He pressed his cheek to the top of her head. "We built a home, girl. Not just for us, but for everyone still walking out of storms." Hope's tail tapped steady agreement. She nudged his chin upward, as if to remind him dawn starts early for caretakers. He chuckled, rising, joints popping pleasantly. "Right. Sleep." He clicked off the sweet light, but left the door ajar, trust flowing both directions now. As he strode down the hallway toward his modest, on-site apartment, he felt no echoing emptiness, no walls closing in. Only corridors opening outward, lined with paw prints leading into futures bright and unwritten. And at his side padded the dog who had first shown him the map. Sometimes, what saves us isn't a miracle or a cure, it's a steady presence, a warm nudge, a pair of amber eyes that see through everything and still choose to stay. Stories like Hope and Elijah's remind us that dogs, especially loyal souls like German shepherds, don't just walk beside us. They carry parts of our hearts we didn't know needed healing. If this story stirred something in you, maybe a memory, maybe a longing to reconnect, there's a gentle resource I've come across that might help deepen the bond between you and your dog. It's nothing flashy. Just thoughtful, quiet guidance, the kind that feels like sitting on the porch with an old friend who happens to understand dogs deeply. You don't have to click. But if your heart says yes, if you're ready to listen more closely, to love more fully, the link's right there when you're ready. Take your time. Love doesn't rush.